Call to order the October 3rd meeting of the Scandia Planning Commission. Please join me in saluting the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, you've had a chance to look at the agenda. Any additions or subtractions to the agenda?
I move to approve. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And for the minutes, we are planning to review the minutes for last meeting next month. So we'll take a look at that next month at the next meeting. And that moves us right into the public hearings. So the procedure for the public hearings is that we will get a staff report from the city planner, and after the report is over, then the public will have a chance to comment. After everybody's had a chance to comment, we'll close the public discussion, and then the commissioners will open our discussion. And if you do decide to make a comment, please remember to address all of your comments to the commission. And also, the city has been notified by the postmaster that they said a great number of public hearing notices were placed in mailboxes around town. And they asked us to inform the public that using the mailboxes for distributing anything other than official mail is illegal and punishable if caught. And if you could please refrain from doing so in the future. Just a little FYI on that. So, Sherry, if you would like to start with that, we'll start with our first item, which is the minor subdivision for the variance for the wetland setback.
Yeah, so this is an application that we heard last time from Dan Manthe. He is doing a minor subdivision, and as we reviewed that last time, we learned that he actually needs a variance from the city's required setback from the wetland boundaries in order to locate the road into his development, which is on the picture up here. He is creating the two lots that are hatched, and there's a third outlot to the east of that. He is doing the common driveway to try to avoid the wetlands. Nonetheless, our ordinance requires them to be 75 feet back from the wetland boundary, and the best that they can achieve is 71 feet. And in fact, it would be impossible to put a driveway on lot 1 at all to meet the setbacks. So he's doing the common driveway to try to create any sort of driveway for that parcel. So tonight we're looking at the variance rather than the subdivision, which you looked at the last time. So I'll focus the comments on the variance. We also had the Conservation District take a look at this one and give their comments regarding the proposed location and the wetlands. The applicant's rationale for this variance is that the property includes a number of wetlands. He is proposing a shared driveway in order to avoid the wetlands and minimize the impacts as much as possible. And it is not possible to locate a driveway for lot 1 at all on that parcel because of all the wetlands and the required setbacks on that parcel. I think Neil actually did some calculations today, and with the 70, being able to do the 71 feet, he's really only impacting something like 100 square feet of the setback area. So it's a pretty minimal area that he would be impacting. And Jay Riggs from the Conservation District reviewed the delineation report, said a lot of the wetlands are of moderate quality wetlands, but he believes that this proposed location is a reasonable alternative to minimize the impacts to the wetlands, and he doesn't have any concerns about it from the perspective of the Wetland Conservation Act. What we do is look at the criteria in the zoning ordinance for granting a variance to determine if this meets those criteria for granting a variance. The first criteria is that it needs to be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the official control, even though they're asking for a variance from the specific provisions of it. In this case, this use is permitted in this district, and you have to have a driveway in order to have a residential use on a property. There's no location on Lot 1 where a driveway could be located outside all the required setbacks. And the proposed shared driveway is generally in harmony with the goals of the plan to protect driveways, or to protect wetlands, because the shared driveway will, in its location here, will not have negative impacts on the wetlands. It will minimize impervious cover and will minimize the impacts to the wetlands as much as possible. The second criteria is that he's proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner, and it is. Residential uses are a reasonable use in this district. The third point is that the practical difficulties are not caused by the landowner, and they're unique to the property. In this case, it's the wetlands that are the issue. They weren't created by the owner, and the locations and that physical feature is a unique feature of this property. It won't alter the essential character of this area. There are other single-family parcels in this area with similar homes and similar uses. The economic conditions alone are not the practical difficulties, it's mostly the location of the wetlands on the parcel. This won't have any impacts on the supply of lighter air to adjacent properties or affect public safety or public services. The proposed variance is the minimum action required to eliminate the difficulty. He's getting them as far away from the wetlands as he possibly can while providing a driveway for each parcel and minimizing the driveway area on the two parcels. So the findings of the staff report are that we recommend granting the variance along with the subdivision approval to create the two parcels and the outlot for a driveway that will be located 71 feet from the delineated boundary of wetland basins 5 and 6 on lots 1 and 2, with the conditions that you see on page 7 and 8, and those have not changed since the last meeting.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, that will open it up to public discussion. If anybody would like to share anything about this. Sure.
I have a question about,
If you could come up to the podium and state your name and address in. Sorry, Steve.
my name is Kurt Peterson, I live at 21617 Meadowbrook Avenue, and I don't have anything to do with this, but I do make maps. I'm wondering, do you allow driveways on, it looks like there's a drainage easement running in for that whole thing, from here to here. And do you allow driveways over drainage easement?
With culverts and whatever, yeah.
The engineer has looked at this and he's okay with it.
Okay, because normally drainage easements, you're not allowed in a driveway in a drainage easement normally.
Yeah, but
And
he's,
the second point I want to make is that the septic, how far is those septics from the wetland? Don't they have to be 200 or 300 feet away?
no, the county, that's regulated by the county. They do the septic permits, and the staff from the county have looked at this and has said while it's tight, they believe there's enough space there
Yeah,
to be far
I think
enough.
it's 300 feet from the wetland. Thank you.
Yep.
Steve?
Hello, Planning Commission. My name is Steve Trondler. I live at 13450 188th Street North. Back in the 90s, I was on the Planning Commission for a number of years, so I want to first thank you for all of your service to this community and your dedication. So it takes a lot of work. Thank you very much for that. Regarding this particular property, I have nothing against the landowners. I have a philosophical question to ask and for you to consider with variances. We had a wonderful discussion at the council last month about variances, and I was encouraged to share some of my opinions with you. They are not the opinions of the council, they are my own. One, generally, I'm opposed to variances. You know, I think if we have laws, we should do what we can to abide by them. And I understand that there are definitely situations that people live in where they have no choice. You go buy a house on a small lot, My neighborhood's full of them. And you don't have a garage. You want to build a garage and you can't. Well, there might be a perfect reason why you would want and need a variance. When you look at what the requirements are for a variance, there are the practical difficulties, three-factor test. Most variances that I've heard passed are generally crafted to allow the landowner to do whatever they want with their property. I would challenge each of you to think about, when was the last time that you ever denied a variance? And I think variances are supposed to be an exception to the rule, not the norm. Reasonableness, that's easy. Most people, I want to put a single-family lot, I want to use this as a residential use, no problem there. The essential character, I don't think that's been much a question at all either. But I do challenge you to think a lot about whether the landowner's problem is due to circumstances unique to the property and not caused by the landowner. Okay? In this case, you have a lot. He's creating 3 lots. The only reason you need a variance is because there are 3 lots. He could use this property in a reasonable way and not require a variance. But he's creating a situation that requires a variance. And I don't think philosophically we should be creating lots that require variances in order to make them buildable. So, that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Manley, I'm the property owner. I understand what he is saying, and I can attest to the fact of his argument, because I've gone through it numerous times building in this area. I asked for a variance for a septic on a lot next to this, because it was gonna be more than 200 feet closer to the lake, and I was denied that, so, because I couldn't put a septic back, but I could have had a gravity feed septic instead of a pump septic, and it would have worked out better, but they said, nope, can't get any closer to the lake, so that's fine. People across the lake got a variance because their house sat better in a better spot, they brought in all kinds of fill, they got their variance. I'm saying philosophically, whatever, practicality, if you're gonna develop this in this county, I think you're gonna have to be reasonable. We're talking 3 feet, 4 feet of, and I would say wetlands are subjective. I had this property wetlanded 15 years ago, and some of these wetlands were on it. So, this ain't etched in stone, this science. That guy could have walked over and put this peg here, and I'd have had 77 feet. I'm just saying. So I don't think I'm, excuse me, but trying to whip a game and get 3 lots on anybody. Certainly I could get 1 lot, but it'd be senseless to do that, in my opinion. I hope you feel the same.
Thank you. Any other thoughts and questions? All right, so we'll close the public hearing and we'll open it up to the commission for discussion. Anybody want to get us started?
Well, my first thought is to address the comment about the delineation of the wetlands. I know we've been on our property about 46 years, and the wetlands there have changed over the years, and sometimes they change from one year to the next.
Sure.
And so there is some variability there, and it isn't just the science, but the fact that they actually vary from year to year or from decade to decade.
Sure, makes
So-
sense.
So our task is to recommend approval of the subdivision and the variance, is that what we're talking about?
That's correct. We're looking at both. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're looking at both.
Is it both of them right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, and frankly, the subdivision, at least the creation of the 2 lots, would not be possible without the variance, because he could not get a driveway on the lot
yes,
line
right.
without the variance.
So when we're looking at the staff recommendations or the conditions, do they apply to the minor subdivision for approval, or
Yeah,
are these
they
things?
apply to both.
replatable.
I also like to defer to people who have some expertise, and I'm looking at what Jay Riggs said, that, quote, "I do not have any concerns with regards to the Wetland Conservation Act," and I don't feel that I'm qualified to overrule someone who actually has experience with this. I don't know about anyone else here, so
Well,
that's
we-
one thing that I look at.
I'll mention this, and we don't have to get into it in detail tonight, but part of what we talked about at the council meeting that Steve didn't mention is that Scandia, a long time ago, decided to have this 75-foot setback from all wetlands. Most communities since then have gone to a different approach, and that is to have a buffer requirement that varies with the quality of the wetland. And so a low-quality wetland might have a 20-foot buffer requirement and maybe a 5-foot setback from the buffer to protect the buffer from impacts. A medium-quality wetland might have a 50-foot buffer. A high-quality wetland might have a 75 to 100-foot buffer.
And that's what the functions and values assessment
Would help to
does.
determine.
Okay.
So part of what is in Jay's mind when he's looking at this is if these are moderate wetlands we're impacting, in most communities where he's looking, they would have had a 50-foot buffer, and this landowner wouldn't even be here. And that's, that's just as a technical person that's going through his head. One of the things I would say about variances is, what I use is typically the League of Minnesota Cities guidance on variances, and if you ever want to read it, it's very good guidance. One of the things they say is that if you find yourself giving repeated variances for the same thing, that's the point where you should start asking the question of, should we be changing our code because of that? And you all know in the last maybe 3 or 4 months, we have had several of these where someone needed a relatively minor variance from the city's 75-foot wetland setback. And that might say that at some point here, we should be looking at that
Yeah.
setback and the science and what our watershed districts say about their buffer width, and deciding whether we want to, whether that's a reasonable thing to do given the state of science right now. I think the city did it when it did it because it felt like it was just easier to have one rule than to try to make people go through a functions and values assessment. It's relatively easy now to do that as a part of a wetland delineation, so things
Okay.
have changed since this was first adopted.
Yeah,
Sure,
actually-
when someone applies for a variance, is that filtered before it gets to us? Are
Very
they-
much so.
so-
The reason we don't reject, we have almost no variances rejected, is that the staff, using our experience with what the city has approved before, are very upfront with people about whether we think they meet the criteria.
So if it's unlikely that it would be approved, you discourage them from bringing it forward?
And the way I say it is,
That's a
I'm
good point.
unlikely to recommend approval, and I think that's how Neil would say it too. But every time someone comes in and wants a variance from the impervious cover in shoreland, for instance, we're very upfront with people saying the city has never done that, and we just don't really see that as a likely, that you're welcome to go after it, but it's gonna cost you money and time, and this is the history of that. And
And
so
it-
things are very much filtered.
So the bottom line is that if it gets to us, that it's very likely that it would be approved.
At
Or at
least
least
based
there's a
on,
reasonable
Or it's
basis
reasonable
for-
to
at
approve,
least
okay,
there's a
good way to put
reasonable
it.
basis. We
Or-
aren't pre-deciding it,
Or
but
they've
we're
been,
just saying, based on what the city's done before,
or they've been informed that it's not likely. However, they still choose to go forward and
Yeah, which we've had a few.
Which
some
we've
of those.
had.
and
We
we
have
have
had some
had
of
a
those.
few
Right.
rejections, or
Right.
people that
Okay.
were rejected and then went back and made
Right.
some changes.
Right.
We have done that a few times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tom, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve, resolution 10-03-17-01.
I'll second that.
All right. Any further
Whoa.
discussion?
No, I don't think so. 3-1 ways.
Speak up if you have,
Yeah.
No, I have just things that were on my mind, and I have 3 leaning one way and 1 leaning the other way. So I guess that's my vote. So I'm ready to vote.
Yeah, and I would say I in principle agree with Steve's comment about not allowing lots to be made that are going to inherently require a variance. But my thoughts both ways are that this variance is very minor and possibly not even necessary based on the discussion with
Right.
Sherry and the
With Jay.
quality
Right.
and the J and the quality of these wetlands. And yeah, it just seems like a very reasonable use. That's
Right.
my thought. So anyways, all right. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So that will go to the city council next at their next meeting, which is 2 weeks from today. Oh, thank you. And that will bring us to the discussion on amending the development code, Chapter 2, Rural Event Centers.
All right, so, the city council recently reviewed Jeff Gasik's application for an annual operating permit for his rural event facility. And during that discussion, we all noted that there had been no complaints about that facility during the year that it had operated with its first annual operating permit. And Jeff asked the council at that point, if there are no complaints or concerns about this kind of facility, if I've met all the conditions, could the review be an administrative review rather than having to go through the city's consultants and then to the city council? And the council felt that that was a pretty reasonable request, that we don't want to unnecessarily burden small businesses in the community if they're complying with all of the conditions for their permits. In the ordinance as it is now, there is not a specific statement about who will conduct the annual operating permit. It just says there will be one. With the mining projects, we have always had consultant review, engineer review through the city council, partly because typically there have been at least a few concerns about those projects. But for this one, I think the council's thought to you is that it would be very reasonable if someone is complying with all their conditions for it to be an administrative process through the city administrator. If he has any concerns or receives complaints, then it's definitely his option to bring it through the review process through the city council and to ask the engineer or attorney or whoever to provide some thoughts on it. But this amendment, the point of this amendment is to state specifically in the ordinance that if there are no complaints, it can be an administrative review process. So that's what this amendment is about. For any such facility in the future, it's not just this one, but anyone who receives an interim use permit to have this kind of use, then could have it as an administrative review rather than a council review.
Specifically for the Rural Event Center.
Specifically rural
The rural
event
event
centers,
center.
not any of the other interim or conditional uses, just specifically for this one.
Right.
Another clarifying question, you said no complaints, are we talking about validated complaints confirmed by somebody?
Well, at the point where the council had heard his AOP, there had been no complaints at all.
Okay,
You noticed that there were one a week ago and then this past weekend.
Mhm.
Those were after the public hearing notice for his proposed amendment to his
Mhm.
permit came out. But that was after the
Sure.
council meeting where his
Sure.
AOP
Okay.
was heard.
okay. So would it change, sorry, would your suggestion change if there was any complaints whatsoever?
It really would be Neil's call at that point, I think. I don't know how you would see it.
I would think if there were, valid complaints that were documented, that it would automatically just, go to-
Elevate itself?
Right,
elevate
but in this
itself, yeah.
situation where the deputy's comment is that he didn't violate the ordinance, then I think it's really up to
Well, I'd like to comment on that because I did hear them both nights, and I can tell you exactly when I heard them because we have a surveillance system, and I take the dog out at a certain time, and I looked on Google, and I'm 4,000 feet away, and I could hear it as plain. The music was just as plain as someone standing next to me.
Okay,
Not-
hang on,
Different.
hang on.
Let me finish what I'm saying. I could hear it I continued on down to the building, our greenhouse. When I came back out, which in one case was 10:09 and the other case was 10:15, I didn't hear anything, and when I was in our building, I didn't hear anything. So while I heard it, I would not say, okay, it definitely went beyond the boundaries of their property, but I can't say that it was unreasonably annoying.
So you'll have to save that till we actually do
Okay,
his
but I'm just
permit.
saying that
It's
that
a-
it
It's
is-
a question of whether
it's a question, and
validated or not.
I just, okay, I'll bring it up later when we.
So what this ordinance amendment says is that an annual operating permit may be issued through the administrative permit process. If the annual facility inspection indicates non-compliance with the conditions of the AOP or IUP, the application shall be reviewed by the city council. So it's that annual inspection, which typically includes a look at any complaints, that at least as this is worded now, would determine whether it's heard by the council or not. And that would be Neil's call.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry.
Yep.
All right, and that'll open up to the public. If anybody would like to make
Clarify.
any.
This, not this.
Right, yeah, so this is specifically for the ordinance change, not for the, the amendment to the interim use permit. So, if you would please, if you have any comments on this particular amendment to the ordinance.
Hi, I'm Camille Schroepfe. I live at 2117 Newberry Court. And as far as this, so this has been a year. The first part of the year, he didn't have
Hey,
any
just,
events there.
hang on, just one second. This is specifically just for the ordinance change.
Right, so that he
changing
doesn't
from
have
the-
to do this because nobody complained,
This,
right?
no, this is not about
This is
him
not, yeah,
specifically.
this would be
This is-
about for everybody.
Oh, everybody?
Everybody that had a
This first
rural
one.
event, anybody that had a rural event center.
Well, we're gonna be talking about these separately, or?
Yeah, we will be discussing that.
Probably the next
I
one.
don't
Right.
understand.
Yeah.
understand what
Hey,
you're saying.
Okay, okay, I'll explain. We have two more public hearings tonight, okay? The first one is in regards to a change in our ordinance. Not specific to anybody, just a change in the ordinance that would allow a rural event facility that is in compliance to not have to go through a city council approval of their annual operating permit, but would rather be able to go through just an administrative permit, meaning that they would be able to get it signed off just by the city manager without having to, go through the process where they come before the city council, which is not us. Then later, after we're done with this discussion of just the ordinance, we will be hearing a change in the interim use permit for the redeemed farm. That is coming next. That's not what we're talking about right now.
That's why
Is
my
that
question was
clarified?
Just the ordinance.
Just the ordinance, okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Joanne Bennick, 12400 213th Street North. So how long have we had rural event centers?
Couple of years.
Not much longer than that.
How many are there?
Just one at this point.
Okay, so we're gonna change an ordinance on one that's only been there for a year under scrutinized behavior. I don't think it makes sense at all to change an ordinance at this point. I think you need a couple years under your belt and maybe not just based on one. So basically, you're changing it for one event center, and I think that's wrong.
Completely dovetails.
Wait, allow,
Hi, Patty Peterson, 21617 Meadowbrook. And I'm, as far as the ordinance that disallows the people of Scandia to speak, whether or not they have a complaint or not. And that doesn't give us the right to speak. So I did vote that down.
Sir? Thank you.
did you want to share something or have a comment?
Well, no, I'll wait.
Please.
I mean,
State,
Schroepfe, 21174 Newbury Court. I guess to me, this just dovetails in exactly to the redeemed. If he's the only one, and it's only been there a year, And there's people here that can tell you, you can hear this guy when he's playing his music.
Separate.
And I know it's not the issue, but we know we're talking about the, I mean, we all know we're talking about the same
But-
thing right now.
But we're not, so.
But we're not, okay,
So,
but we are.
let's just,
I'll wait till the next
just-
topic comes up.
just-
I'll be back.
just to-
I'll be back.
just to clarify for people that didn't understand, we're talking about an ordinance that covers all rural event centers. And so we could be talking about
One.
All of the one.
Okay,
events.
at
okay,
this time,
shh, okay,
at this time.
all right.
Yes, but we're not talking about.
All right,
the future.
any other comments about the ordinance change? Please.
Erin Snickle, 21097 Meadowbrook Circle. My comment is just that if it's something that you would think about to lift that requirement, maybe to put in some sort of timeline, because a rural event center could be so new, and I'm not, there's one, but there will be more in the future, I'm
Sure.
sure. Just a time period where we can see how things go. For example, when during that year, the 2 years or 3 years that you have the time period where people can come and voice their opinions. There are changes being asked for, like the second issue that we're going to talk about that does specifically site redeem farms, that we would have a chance to talk about those things before more of those applications happen.
Good comment.
When, yeah, thank you for that comment. And us also kind of goes back to the other comment about not having the public voice. We are not saying that there will not be any review. That's not what the ordinance change is. There will still be an administrative review. It will be done by the administrator, and if there are issues, any issues, then he can still bring it forward to the city council, at which time the public would have a chance to comment. So, just to open that up,
Well, and
clarify that a little
anytime
bit.
anyone wants to apply to have a rural event center, that requires a public hearing. Right. And gives public comment.
To
So it's
start.
For,
not
to
that-
start, for the
yeah,
initial
that it's not that
CUP,
in
yeah.
in the future, you wouldn't have that opportunity if someone proposes to do another rural event center in Scandia.
Right.
There always would be that public hearing. This is more about after that first year of operation or after their third year of operation, if there aren't any complaints, how do we handle the review of?
Right,
And the fact that it's in front of the city council does not necessarily guarantee that the public will be able to speak, because the annual review does not require a public hearing. So it would always be at the council's discretion whether they would choose to open the meeting up to public comments
Sure.
or not. Just to be clear, they usually do.
Because the
but just
review
be
wouldn't come to
clear,
us.
The annual review doesn't guarantee a public hearing.
Right.
But is the public allowed to submit comments to,
If
To the
they
council?
see on the council agenda that this is on the agenda, they certainly can.
Okay.
But there's not a public hearing, so there's not public notice in the newspaper, there's not any kind of mailed notice, there's not a designated time for any of the annual operating permits. That includes the mining ones as well.
how is that timing determined? Is that based on when the permit was first issued?
Yeah, so it's a year after the permit was first issued.
Okay.
But
So that would vary depending on when they applied, and
Right.
it could be different for
this was
everyone.
this year because it was issued in October
last
a
year.
year ago.
Okay.
And so but I just want to be real clear
Yeah,
that there
thank you.
isn't, simply having it at the council meeting at this point doesn't guarantee any kind of public hearing, public notice. We've never had that as a part of annual operating permits.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other comments?
No.
Okay. Jeff?
Jeff Gasek, Reading Farm, 21325 Meadowbrook. The discussion at the city council meeting,
Please,
the discussion at the city council meeting was really about just putting an undue burden onto businesses that try to do business in Scandia, and the fact that this annual operating permit that would come up, it costs over $250 for us to file for it and to have Sherry and her department go through a review of it. And at that point, there weren't any complaints, and the discussion was really just to say, there's, other than the mining, rural or annual operating permit, there's no other businesses in Scandia that have to go through this annual thing. And we're not asking that the annual thing be relieved. We're just asking if it can be done administratively through Neil. And obviously, he can raise it up to the council if there's a reason to raise it up for it. But we're really just trying to eliminate the cost of having to go through a full review that's Sherry submits to you guys or to the city council. And so that was really the purpose, is not to eliminate the annual operating review. It's just to put it in a context that if we are within the parameters of the code, and Neil can make the decision on renewing it without having to spend the extra money to do what Sherry does. So that was the reason.
Thank you. Any other?
I just have a question about the term annual, because if I remember right, Jeff didn't get approved for his rural event center until like October 16th to 20th last year.
Okay.
And so it's only October 3rd right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so all complaints should be filed and registered with that because it hasn't been a year yet. So I don't really understand how you're doing business, so I'm just questioning that. Thank you.
Thanks. Any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, we chose to do the annual operating permits, so. it
Based on a
wouldn't
month,
run out.
yeah, sure.
I mean, it's the same way we've done the mining ones. Their permits run from March to March, but we do the annual review in January, just in case there are some questions and the council would need to have another meeting on it. You wouldn't put the person's ability to operate in jeopardy. So we did the review in September this year so that we could have the September council meeting and potentially the October one if we needed to.
Yeah.
To deal with any issues. So that's the timing question. And he needs to apply for his permit, I think it's 60 days before the annual date, so that we have that time for a potential couple reviews by the council.
Seems reasonable. Okay.
Joanne Benick, 12400 213th Street North. My concern is that if you change this, people will, you have an event, a new event center come in, they will be very accommodating that first year. If you take that board review away, then I just think you need to, we're basing this all on, there's not many to base it on yet, there's not enough history. I think you need some more time and history, and then go ahead and change it. If everything goes great for 3-4 years, go ahead and change it. But we don't have the history and backup. I mean, currently, if you're basing, if there's only one that we're dealing with, only one to compare to, it'd be real easy to follow all the rules for that first year. We've just kind of gotten into the season, so we don't even have a good full year of operating behind it to go on with any event center, with any site. So I would really urge you to hold that note, and if all goes well for, 3-4 years, go for it. But I think it's harder to take something away later, or add it back in. You take it away now, try to add that back in later, it's gonna be more difficult. Give yourself some time, let the dust settle, then think about, all goes well with, you get 3 or 4 of these and all's going great, then go ahead and let just one person do that review in the building here. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll close the public discussion period and open it up to the commission.
I remember when we first started talking about having such a permit, and the Redeemed Farm was not even on the horizon at that time. There was
mhm.
actually a different one that was being considered.
Right.
And
that's right.
one reason why we decided to have this event center, not because of this particular person, but there are other communities in the Twin Cities that were allowing landowners, particularly farm owners, to try to supplement income in other ways that was acceptable. That was not a burden on the community, but would allow them to pay the bills.
Keep an old barn going.
Right, right, and this is kind of a thing that has become a bit of a trend right now. And one reason why Mr. Gasek has a business is because it's a trend right now, and people are engaged in it. I have no doubt that at some point we will have other farms, property owners who want to participate in this. And I hesitate to look at this just as the Redeemed Farm. And I think we need to be careful about that.
Mhm.
You mean,
I think to look at it, as you said, that we're looking at the ordinance. And as my understanding from what you said, I'm going to repeat what I think has been said about 5 times now, this does not mean that it would not get escalated to
Right.
a regular review.
Right, if Neil found compliance problems the next time he did a site visit, or if he had a number of complaints that suggested they weren't in compliance, he can make the call to have the review go to the city council, involve all the consultants, ask for reports, whatever he
Right.
feels
Mhm.
he needs to.
Mhm.
Okay.
The question is, for anybody who's operating one of these event centers, do you think it's reasonable to have the annual operating permit be something the administrator can approve if everything has gone fine the previous year,
Right.
rather than having it go to the city council?
So-
And just want to review for a minute what the annual operating permit was about and why we did it. And it partly relates to what you just said. There are a number of communities around the Twin Cities that allow these kinds of businesses, whether they're called rural event centers or rural weddings or whatever.
Okay.
Some communities, they have worked out fine. Other communities, there have been problems. Scandia is the only community that has an annual operating permit. And the reason we did that
Is it aligned
is
with-
because it's so hard to take away a conditional use permit or an interim use permit. If a facility, it's a very difficult legal process. If things aren't going well and the community decides they want to take away that basic permit, it's a property right, and it's very difficult to take it away. Whereas with the annual operating permit, you have a chance to say, we're not gonna let you operate this year until you clean things up. You're not taking away the person's whole underlying, you're saying, we have the ability, and with probably less difficulty than taking away the whole permit, to say, you didn't do well this year, so we're not gonna let you operate for the next 6 months or for the next year until you clean things up. That's the point of this. The question I think the council was asking after their discussion with Mr. Gasek is, if a place is doing just fine and there haven't been any complaints, can we take the cost burden off that person of having the review through all the consultants and the council, and have it go to Neil and let him make the judgment of whether more, I mean, he can always, in fact, if he wants to, ask for his consultants to do some looking at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If we, you know, if the engineer needs to look at it, he can look at it as part of that administrative permit.
Is that a significant burden on you to do that?
You know, either way, whether it goes through, the process with the council or not, I'm gonna spend about probably the same amount of time
About the same
on it.
amount of time, okay.
Right, it's just that
You
you'll
know.
end up doing the report, instead of me, he'll be doing the report to the council that says, they complied with this and this, there were problems
Right.
with this. And,
Okay.
and that's really what the question is does that go through Neil? And so that he could bring it up at a city council meeting and say, there were no problems this year, I issued the new permit, because I think you would always bring it to the council and let them know what you did with it.
Right.
Or do we need to go through this more formal, time-consuming and costly process to take it through the way we're doing it now.
So I have a couple of thoughts, or a few thoughts. If, just yes or no, if we didn't, if the current rural event center wasn't coming in for a change of the IUP, they would have went in for the AOP come this month. It would have went right to the city council. Nobody would have gotten a letter. Nobody would have known because there wasn't a mailing. It's not a public hearing. There's not a send out. Not the neighbor. Nobody would know that they were coming in for their annual operating permit. They would have come in, got approved. There wouldn't have been likely any complaints because there wasn't up until this letter went out for a different issue.
No one came to the city council meeting and lodged any complaints.
This has already happened. The AUP
It's
has already
happened.
happened.
Oh, sorry, excuse
It happened
me.
in
So,
September.
right, you're right, because this is approving it for this next one, regardless. So what I'm saying is that nobody knew about it. Nobody said anything. There's no mailings.
There
So
had been no complaints during
no
the
complaints
year.
up until that time. Right. And so if there were complaints throughout the year, they would have heard about them. We would have heard about them. The city would have heard about them. Neil would have heard about them.
Right, it would have
And
been
if
in
Neil
the
had-
staff report for the ALP.
And if Neil had concerns, and he would bring them to the city council, and he would say, I'm going to elevate this. I can't make this decision myself. I'm going to ask the city council to make this decision. But there still would be no mailings. There's no public hearing,
Right,
correct?
that's correct.
He's just changing
People
it.
would have to be looking at the council agenda to know
Right.
that it was up.
Right, right. So Neil would just say that I have enough concern here from the public. I'm not going to make this decision myself. I'm going to ask you to help make the decision.
And
So,
presumably the public could call Neil and say, is that coming up soon, or when is that coming up? Because I want to say something.
Sure.
so if I'm trying to think of the benefit of keeping it the way that it is versus moving it to an administrative AOP.
The way I see it, the only benefit is that the city gets $250 of the rural event center owners' money.
Right, because I'm thinking, well, somebody moves into town that's
Potentially more.
And,
Potentially more.
if somebody moves
If
into
there's consultants involved.
right, yeah.
if somebody were to move into that radius, right, that wouldn't they wouldn't even get a letter. You know, if there was a new person in town that wanted to know or voice their concern, they wouldn't even know because there wouldn't be a letter, right?
Right.
So the only benefit is to get the $250.
And frankly, it becomes a pass-through to the consultants. If the engineer spends time on it, part of it goes to him, part of it goes to me, part of it goes to the attorney. Whoever's involved in it, whatever fee Jeff pays goes through to the consultants, except for, I think, $100, that's the fee to the city. So that's right. What the difference here is you're trusting, the city would be trusting the administrator to call in the council if he feels he needs to.
Right. Which is how we run
A lot
all of our ordinances, right? I mean, they
Right.
get
It's all on
changed
a
or complaint basis. We don't have an ordinance officer
Right.
that drives around and checks up on ordinances or IUPs or AOPs. It's all based on complaint.
And some cities do. Some cities have an annual review of all their CUPs. They send their zoning enforcement officer out to take a look and see if
But we
the
don't-
city doesn't have that staff person. And
We
so
don't have
you
that.
No,
don't
I
do
think
it.
that existed until 2005 or 6 or something like that.
So it's totally on a complaint basis here now, and everyone is always depending on Neil, pretty much, to listen to their complaints and deal with them.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point.
there's not really any benefit.
Well,
It's-
I don't think we're taking anything away other than an unnecessary expense. Where it's not like folks don't have any recourse.
right, right.
They
You can
sti-
still contact the city council just the same way, or Neil, whoever.
Oh, and maybe what other voice, I'm trying to think of what other voice the city council would have to deny, okay, so the AOP comes up, like it did last month for the city council. Why would any of them deny it unless they had complaints from people? And the complaints would come either way, with or without the city council looking at it. It'd
Right.
come to Neil and he'd give it to them, or it'd come to Neil and Neil would look at it.
Or or if Neil had found in his annual site visit that they were out of compliance with one of the conditions. For example, that they had converted a bunch of the parking to
Sure,
something else and
sure,
they now didn't have enough
sure.
parking space.
Yeah.
Neil could say, you're out of compliance with the conditions, that's gonna come in front of the
So
council.
we keep this AOP going to the city council if we want $250 or if we don't trust Neil to bring the complaints up. If he's gonna sweep it under the rug.
But it's required. It says shall. It says if there are complaints, the application shall be reviewed by the city
Right,
council.
and so if we don't trust Neil to
Yeah,
bring
so
the
we don't
complaints
even have
up.
to trust the guy.
It doesn't
have to,
matter.
either way.
It doesn't matter. It says shall. It's not even based. It's not even like, well, maybe
can determine if it's a good-
Yeah, it's
yeah.
not even maybe if he thinks it's okay, then it's okay. It's shall. That's
But even if it is a shall, and he does bring the complaints to the city, again, residents would have to be watching the mailings to determine when that AOP is coming due, because
There wouldn't
there's
be a
not a
public
public
There's not,
notice,
yeah.
there's not any letters.
bottom line. The change here is fairly minor.
Well, I'm all
minus-
for simplifying things
Absolutely.
and handling things at the level that it can be handled without kicking it to a higher authority. I think it's just a waste of time to take some of these mundane things and make it required
spin
to
it
go
up
to the
to
council.
some kind of a big deal. Yeah,
So that's my feeling.
if it's not.
Great motion.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
My only thought is I'd be careful of calling something like this mundane, because if it is something that is bothering a neighbor, it's not mundane at all. So
Well,
I'm just cautious
yes.
about using that terminology. I want to emphasize that this doesn't change the responsibility or the review process if there are problems.
Absolutely.
That's what we want to
Yeah.
emphasize here.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking at.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for
So-
saying that. Yeah.
I make a motion to approve the amendment to the Development Code, Chapter 2, Section 4.32, rural event facilities to modify the IUP renewal.
AOP.
It says IUP right here.
Oh,
Should be-
it's supposed to be AOP.
Should be
AOP renewal from the city council to just the administrative approval.
There's also a typo in it.
Okay,
Number 9, it refers to application instead of amplification.
You have a second? You have a,
Second.
okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That ordinance change will go to the next city council meeting, 2 weeks.
All right.
All right, and that takes us on to the next item, which is the application for changing the interim use permit to allow for 200 guests at the Redeemed Farm. Sherry?
okay, so this is a request from Jeff and Julie Gasick to amend the interim use permit that they have to their rural event facility to increase the number of guests that are permitted at each event from 150 to 200. They are not requesting any other changes or amendments to their interim use permit. They cited a variety of information in their request. One was a revised traffic management study that was completed for the site that concluded that there would be no negative impacts if the number of guests at each event was increased to 200. And the city engineer reviewed that traffic study and also concluded he didn't see any immediate issues with raising that number. They have parking spaces for 125 cars, which would accommodate 200 guests. The fire chief has submitted a letter stating that the existing buildings can accommodate 200 guests. The building inspector stated that the existing buildings can accommodate 200 guests. And so the way that we look at an amendment to an interim use permit is the same way, the same process and criteria that we look at for the original interim use permit. So we hold a public hearing to give the public a chance to comment on the proposed change. And we look at the same criteria, which in this case are the criteria generally for interim use permits in the code and the criteria for this specific use, the rural event facility. So I'll walk through with you the staff analysis related to those criteria and the findings.
And I'm sorry, that's where I saw the typo,
Okay.
was in those criteria.
Oh,
never
okay,
mind.
well then
I-
remind me when we get there.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So, in terms of the rural event facility performance standard, they meet the minimum lot size requirement for the standard. The ordinance would permit up to 300 guests. When this IUP was originally written, they were limited to 150, kind of as a trial to see how 150 would go. But the ordinance allows a maximum of 300, so their request is within what the ordinance permits. They have an operating wastewater system. If that is not able to handle the 50 more guests, they would need to renew their permit with Washington County. I haven't had any concerns expressed from the county about that. I think that's, the system they have is adequate. Access from a public roadway, MnDOT reviewed the original event facility request, found the traffic study to be adequate, but MnDOT said they cannot access, the use cannot access the highway directly. They need to access through Meadowbrook Avenue. And so that remains as a condition here, that they have to have their access from Meadowbrook Avenue. The engineer took a look at that, said he doesn't have any comments on it at this point in time. If there gets to be a point, because of the increased number of guests, that some traffic problems are observed on the roadway, he wanted a condition that the applicant would need to work with the city engineer and/or MnDOT to see if the traffic control coming in and out of their facility needed to be modified at all. So you'll see that condition here for the amendment, is that if there are some problems arise, then he would need to work with the engineer on traffic control in and out of his site. They have enough parking spaces to meet the code requirement. The code would require 66 spaces. They have 125, so there's not an issue there. We've continued the condition that there's no parking on public streets, that they have to accommodate all the parking on their site. The ordinance permits outdoor sound amplification of only the ceremonies. Otherwise, the party reception part of the event needs to be within the barn. That's still what they're proposing, so we have not changed any of the conditions related to outdoor sound amplification, and the requirement that amplified noise needs to be controlled between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. so that the sound is not audible beyond the property boundaries. They meet the setback requirements. They're not proposing to change the hours of operation or the number of events that they would be having in a year. They're not requesting any additional signage. In terms of complying with the other city regulations, they obtained the stormwater permit that they needed from Comfort Lake, Forest Lake, and they're not proposing any change on the site that would require a new permit. The city's fire chief has said that they meet the requirements for a building, that the building is of adequate size and offers enough exits to allow the increase from 150 to 200 occupants. And the building inspector also said that the facility meets the common path of egress travel with compliant exit and access for that number of people. In terms of general criteria for an interim use permit, they're not really making much change from the last time we went through this whole analysis. The conditions have all remained the same, and so the general conclusion would be that with the conditions that are imposed on this permit, they meet the requirements for an interim use at this facility. So the staff recommendation is to permit the increase from 100 to 200 attendees because they meet the conditions and the criteria for this specific use and for an interim use. The conditions start on page 9 and go on to page 10. And the only change in those from the current conditions is the change in the number of people that would be allowed at each event. Otherwise, they're the same. But when you issue an amended permit, you just bring all the conditions forward so that you have one permit rather than people having to go look at multiple permits. So that's why you're bringing them forward.
Did you hear that? Okay. Thank you. We had that question earlier.
Oh, about why?
Why the current?
Yeah,
the-
that's just
yeah.
traditional with conditional use permits and IUPs, that you bring all the conditions forward so the applicant has one thing, and the city has one thing to look at rather than having to go back and keep looking
Review.
through. You know, sometimes people have 3 or 4 amendments and then it gets really complicated, so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sherry.
Right. Oh, and I was gonna mention, one change, since you received this report, when the report was written, there had been no complaints about the facility during the first year of operation. After the weekend of December 30th, or 23rd and 30th, there was a complaint each weekend.
September, you mean?
September
Did you-
30th,
yeah, okay.
I'm sorry, September 23rd and 30th. There was one complaint each weekend about sound. There was a deputy at the events who took a look at the sound and at the ordinance requirement and found that the sound levels were in compliance with the ordinance. And Neil sent those reports to you with a cover memo, and you actually got the complaint, so if you want to add anything,
No, I don't think there's anything to add, because when they came in here, we had asked for either the reports, and those were provided by the county.
okay,
Okay.
so that's it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. That'll open it up to the public discussion. If anybody has any comments, we'd be happy to hear them now.
I'm back. Okay, scroll
Name
this
and
down.
address.
Give your name and address,
Yeah.
please.
Who's ever rolling?
Can you, sir? Can you give your name and address again, please?
Yeah, 21174 Newberry Court, Scandia, Minnesota 55073.
Thank you.
All right. Sound amplification is permitted in the barn. All doors, windows, and other openings shall be closed.
That doesn't
Now, my question is this: how is it that we and other neighbors of this area, I understand a sheriff or a deputy apparently was there monitoring sound. I don't know if he had a decibel meter or how he's determining this. If the building is closed, how are we hearing it across Highway 97, a considerable distance from there? I mean, I would have to have my stereo in my house. I couldn't get it loud enough with the doors and windows shut. And I understand you've probably got a sound system, but it would be so loud we couldn't talk. I've got a good stereo. There's no way he'd hear it coming out of my house. How are we hearing it from that barn?
That's a really good question, because I've been on the site with the amplification very high, and at the edge of the property could not hear it.
I find that extremely
So-
hard to believe.
I can,
I've done it. I've done it. I was
I
there.
can explain.
Well,
So-
I live there, and I dispute that.
So and that's what I'm saying is I don't understand. I don't know the answers to that at this point. Hopefully we can figure that out through this
Let's
discussion.
finish the public hearing.
Yeah.
Let's go on.
Sure, it can be one direction. It can also be that the windows and doors are open and it's up too loud.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Thank you. Sure. Come,
Who's coming up?
Jeff.
Wait, oh, okay, you go. I have one more thing. If the amount of people is permitted to increase, I can see where there could possibly be a trend to where also other noises could increase, and possibly even the music could get louder. I don't know. But I just know that with things existing as they are now, and what we are able to hear now, that it seems personally, or possibly feasible, that if the amount of people are allowed to increase, that the noise could increase, and the music could even increase.
Sure.
I don't know, I just
Yeah.
have to throw that out there, since we're here, because he wants to increase the amount of people that can be there. And from how I understand the law, possibly in a few years, that could increase to even a higher amount, which could even increase the amounts of noise the residents nearby are hearing even more. Neil, I got a question for you. Do you know a guy named Mark Paul?
Just,
Mark Paul, if I'm not mistaken, has contacted you, correct?
He has contacted me about issues with regard to the road and feelings that the road is not adequately wide enough.
Would anything he's contacted you about have anything to do with what could be considered a complaint?
I think those were addressed by the council in awarding that. That issue was raised when the permit application was approved. So in my mind, the council's already made a decision on the width of the road.
Okay, when did he contact you? What would you say the dates were? Were they within the last year?
Absolutely.
Yet, within the last year, there's been no concerns or complaints about this property yet. That's what we were all just told.
There are no, well, you know, he's disagreeing with the decision of the city council, not the operation of the facility. There's a difference there.
The applicant has no control over the width of the road. If we demanded that he widen the road, he would not be able to, because he has no right to widen the road. So that would be an issue for the city council. It's actually a complaint against the city council, not the
I
facility.
just thought go ahead.
Yeah, that, you know, and I think that's well stated, that it's not with regard to the operation. It's, you know, he disagrees with the council's decision, when everybody has that right to, but that's not specifically a complaint that you could hold against the operator of the facility.
Okay, but I think it is at least fair to note that there has been some concern, or, I don't know, if not criticism, awareness by the public of what may or may not be happening there. And yet, I think everyone's sort of led to believe that in the last year, the nearby residents and public around there have just been silent, like there has been no concern, but that's really not quite true.
Well, I don't know if that's true.
Joanne Bennett, 12400 213th Street, North Scandia. I know Mark Paul, walks his German Shepherd all the time. I've seen him, I've talked with him. He assured me he had been contacting you, Neil. So because I did not specifically myself call, does not mean that we have not had issues and heard this and had problems. Not a huge complainer, I guess I need to be. I will be from now on. I didn't know, I thought we were supposed to call the sheriff. I thought it was frivolous to call the Washington County Sheriff for noise, when they have many more important things to be addressing. If we are to call you, Neil, are you gonna be here at 10 o'clock at night?
That's why you
9
call the
o'clock at
sheriff's
night?
department. We tell
Okay.
people to call
So
the
I
sheriff's
will start
department.
calling. I will do that every time. I haven't. I thought we were gonna be working together as a community, that this would be discussed. We'd have this trial period and see how it goes. You would listen to us. But apparently, we were supposed to be calling and complaining every time.
That was explained.
And I regret not having done that now, but I talked to a few people and they assured me they were contacting you. They said your name specifically, so
Well,
I
yeah,
feel like we're getting railroaded a little bit. Have I heard it? I heard it the weekend of my birthday. I sat out on my front porch, which I like to do. I had brain cancer. I like to relax, not be around a lot of people. Boom, boom, boom. I heard the songs perfectly. I heard the music perfectly. I could have sang every word along with it. And that's at my home. Jan heard it from her home, which is, twice the distance, so much further. Then if I go inside the house and don't want to hear the words, then I hear boom. This is what you hear, boom, boom, boom. You hear the bass, boom, boom, boom. I don't know, Dan, you must have some great earplugs or lack of hearing. But I'll tell you what, we do hear it. And we do have to live with it, and we have lots on the other side. It was going to be a retirement home or our son's home, lots over there. Looking right into this parking lot, sit on your front porch there, what are you gonna have? I mean, it's ridiculous. I think, I'm just beside myself right now. I'm beside myself.
Hi, Camille Schwolbe, 2117 for Newberry Court, and as far as like the complaints, so we have considerable amount of people now making U-turns on Newberry Avenue on 97. Now, I do not want to call a sheriff, because what am I gonna say? Hey, another car just made a U-turn and went back down there. Should I be getting license plate numbers? So who is it I should be calling about this? Because I am not going to take up a sheriff's time to say somebody made a U-turn. I'm also not going to call a sheriff when somebody pulls into the farm where there's the sign that says not an entrance, and then they back out right in front of you on 97 because he's got his sign there and he can't go in, but he's gonna back out onto 97. Should I call the sheriff then for that also? Because if that's the case, the sheriff is gonna get really, really sick of us because I can call every time that there's an event. Every single time. I can call 2 or 3 times. So if that's what you would like, we can start doing that. I have not wanted to bother a sheriff with that, and that just makes no sense to me. So Neil, do you want me to start calling you every time, and do you want license plate numbers? Or what is it that you people want? Because you didn't consider us a year ago, you didn't consider the sound, you didn't consider how this would affect all of the rest of us when we had to come home on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and listen to this. Maybe you do, but very few of you have to. So who is it I should complain to? Because I can start doing that so you can understand how bad this is for us.
Okay.
Well, I would say 2 things. One, if there is an immediate concern like the sound, then that would be something to call the sheriff about. If it's somebody that's turning around on the street on Newberry Court, perhaps that's something that could be called into Neil the following day, maybe with the license plate number. That's just a suggestion.
But, we contract with the sheriff's department for that type of patrol and enforcement.
And that's what we want to use our sheriff for, because you have allowed
That's
this, and you want
what
us
we
to now
have.
use our sheriff for people who make U-turns.
The sheriff
constantly
is our
because of
police.
this.
We don't
They
have
are
a
our
police department.
That is our enforcement authority.
We don't have a,
What
we
a
don't,
waste of dollars when they could be used somewhere else,
We don't-
because you allowed this to happen on 97. It's so wrong what you have done to this community.
Take one South Meadowbrook, not 97.
Hi, my name is Patty Peterson. I live at 21617 Meadowbrook, so I am directly south of that property. Oh, I did direction turns north. So, we have full, I see everything, because I can look out my kitchen window. The parking lot was very quiet in the beginning of the year. We'd have maybe 30 or 40 cars. You could tell everybody was kept indoors. It was those days that they had those parties, it was actually usually rainy or cloudy, and there wasn't much, it was very quiet. And then the storms came, and then they lost their electricity. So it was nothing for quite a while, okay? So you guys have to consider this when you think about people not complaining, because there was nothing to complain about as far as them being quiet, as far as them having I live third of a mile away. So I could tell that they were trying, and I'm trying to be a good neighbor. So I didn't have, for me, my thinking was, well, I'm just gonna kind of wait it out. Then, in July, the parties ramped up, they got very loud. And again, I just don't hate to call the sheriff for this, because, what am I gonna say? Every car comes down, starting about 11 or 12 o'clock, and they drive down and they turn around my driveway as soon as they see. So we have increased traffic a lot on the events. You can already know by 10 or 11 o'clock that our events have already they're starting to ramp up. So they always turn around my driveway and they go back. But the bonus was in the middle of July, when it was almost 10 o'clock, and we had a party bus that we were actually socializing in our front room, and it was so loud that it was banging. You could hear the banging and the laughing, and it backed up in our driveway. And I know it was them because we actually walked out and we sat there, and the party bus stayed there, and then it turned left, and it stopped right in front of their parking lot. Okay, so their parking lot is full when they have big events. So are we gonna start shipping people in? Are we gonna have party buses and more noise? I mean, you have to consider that, because they've already done it. So my house was quieter in White Lake than it is, and I was a short distance from Century College. So, then the last thing I have, a little note here.
So can I,
Sure.
no, so I'm sorry, go ahead, finish. I have a question for you when you're,
Okay.
go ahead.
The last one is, Jeff is screening us or screening the noise, or screening whatever, and he's driving up and down the street in a golf cart. And this golf cart has someone with him that is marked with the sheriff. I don't know if he is a hired sheriff, I don't know what else he's got, but you think about it, that police person is probably listening to the top station, or, you know, when we call in. It's 10, 15 minutes for them to turn the volume down. They can close the doors. They can do things to make it quieter. So the noise that they always come in and hear this stuff, it isn't the true noise that's thumping. So that's the thing that I wanted to point out. And really, this person's supposed to represent us if they're sitting in the golf cart? That's illegal in the first place?
I think that individual is hired
a little
by
bit-
the
little bit
by the
different.
farm.
Because they have
Yeah.
the sheriff thing on there.
Yeah,
little
he
bit
hires
different.
a deputy to have on site during the events for
Okay.
security purposes, and that's who
And,
that person
and
is.
off duty.
Yeah, yeah. So
Off-duty
that's not
deputy.
somebody who's being paid by the city.
So he's not representing us and it's not a neutral thing.
It's not like taking one of the on-call sheriff's cars and having them sit on the facility. That's not like that. It's as far as I'm aware, it's an off-duty officer.
Okay, and the golf cart.
There's a statement in there that says what we expect.
Right, if
What is
there's-
it called?
If there's alcohol being served, they
Yep.
need to have a security person.
The security,
And
right?
that could be someone from a private security outfit, it could be an off-duty sheriff's deputy
Right.
who's making a little extra money by providing security off-duty.
Right. So that's who that person is. Whatever badge they have, that's who that person is. The one that they hired personally.
It's not one of our deputies.
Sheriffs.
Okay. Be with the people.
What
Okay.
question did you have?
Well, I was just going to ask you about the sound. Just if you could describe the sound. I mean, I'm not talking about the party bus. I'm talking about the sound actually from the event itself.
I usually always hear drums and then I hear like 1, 2, 3, woo! And everybody screams. That's what I hear.
Okay.
It's a party.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Something you wanted to say, Brandon?
No, if
No.
anybody has any questions for me,
Oh.
there's been questions about, you want me to go up there, about ordinances, follow-up, complaints,
Do we?
golf carts, that they're fine driving a golf cart.
Can they do that?
It's a class 2, yep, they're fine, you can't drive it on a county road, Meadowbrook's not a county road. You can drive it on, Scandia Trail, there's,
I'm driving on
I
city
can go
road.
on, that's a different thing, but on Meadowbrook, they're fine.
Okay.
Any other questions? The deputy that's hired, they always hire Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies, they're always one of our deputies, they do have a radio on them. It's not required for them to have it on, so we always know who is working the event, and we always get in contact with them if there's an issue, to address it on scene. They are a neutral party, they are hired by the GASIX, but they do represent the sheriff's office, and they do have to uphold the law. It says security officer, but the GASIX have picked the sheriff's office because they work hand in hand with everybody out here. They could be working for me tomorrow in Scandia, they could be working the event that night, so that's why they do it. They pick who they pick, so.
Brandon, it's Brandon, right?
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what happens if someone calls in a noise complaint and you've got someone there who's off duty but acting as security? Are they the ones that you call? Or how?
It all depends if the road deputies, it'd be the north car and myself who would take the call. It gets called into dispatch, and then it gets dispatched to the area car, if it's myself working, because I only work Scandia, and then, or if it's the north car if I'm not working. And normally we always call the person that's working the event to take care of the issue, and to investigate it. Since they're there, they know what's going on.
Okay.
And what they do is if there is a noise complaint, they have a decibel meter and they walk around the property in the direction or the area where the complaint is coming from, and they take a reading. If it needs to be turned down, it gets turned down. I haven't heard a time when it has to have been turned down, though, but they do always investigate it.
You can tell when you turn it down. I can hear the noise and it goes, you can tell.
So if we call, they'll turn it down, is that what you're saying?
No,
Brandon, can you respond to the discussion about the turnarounds, U-turns and stuff like that in people's driveways and in on the road? Like if they should call, is calling 911 the appropriate response, or how
if
what
it's
is?
a violation of the driving conduct, I get a couple of those calls a shift. It doesn't, that's my job to respond to those. So when you say it'd be bothering me, that's me doing my job. So that's not bothering me, that's just me working. So that's just fine by me, and if it's an issue, and I have sat there on Fridays and Saturdays, because I work every Friday and Saturday night in the summertime, until 10 o'clock. And I have sat there for periods of time until I get called away on a different call, to monitor it. I did talk to, one person, Paul?
Mark
Mark, he expressed his concern with me, and I did some extra patrol in that area. So, and I can apologize right now, if I received a call, and did not notify the city about it. If I ever notified the city about it, it was because it was in violation and I did find a violation. So if I did receive a complaint, I took the complaint, I investigated it, I found it to be non-relevant, to the for the IUP to be addressed. I didn't report it to them, so I can apologize for not reporting. So if you guys did call and I didn't bring it to them, I apologize, that's my fault, not Neil's fault.
But that would be because there was not it was not a violation.
It was unfounded or irrelevant to the IUP, or
Yeah, okay.
the permit.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah, please.
Last but not least.
Hello, Kurt Peterson, 21617 Meadowbrook Avenue North, just north of the Gate 6, whatever he calls it. I just wanted to express a really deep-seated concern for our neighborhood, because all of us have been violated by this whole rural event center. And all of us have, moved out to Scandia to seek peace and quiet. And it's really what we're about. And it was a very quiet neighborhood before Jeff showed up in his rural event center. And I just want to say that, people of Scandia, it's a rural area, it's very quiet and very nice. It just isn't a fit in this community. And I want to read some excerpts from, this is a news report, a Fox 9 news report, that makes some comments that the Gay-Six made. They said in this news report, but even though the couple has promised to limit the number of events per year, I don't know if the number of events are limited per year.
They are.
In their AOP, they are.
They are? Okay.
75.
Okay, I never heard that number because it never was really decided. I could never
it was.
understood that. Then they said that here, and they limited it to no more than 150 people per event. Okay? That was a promise. That was a promise when they set that thing up. And right now, they're asking for more, which is a break of a promise to our community, which I don't like. Here's what I said. I think barn weddings are suitable in the right spot. And this kind of rural event center is kind of like a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit. That's from me, Kurt Peterson, who lives right next to them. Okay, this is another comment from Jeff. We're grateful and gracious. We have been honest. Well, Jeff has not been honest to me, I'll tell you that right now. We have been talking to the city for more than 2 years. Jeff Gasick said at the planning commission meeting, we have been maligned and we've been beat up. This has been really tough when people question your character. Well, I do question Jeff's character because he gave me some really bad information when he set up when he asked me to move his barn through my property. What he did was, he told me that the rural event, that barn would be used for only Sunday church services, and he told me that it would be only used for like couples wedding retreats or couples marriage retreats and stuff like that. Then 2 months later, I got this notice in the mail saying he wanted to use it for anything. And I feel really betrayed, and I feel very, very hurt by this. And I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. So I really, really want you guys to know that the community has been very good to Jeff, and we've been just shit on, which is horrible. The next thing I'd like to say is that here's some excerpts from other people who have had barn weddings. And here's a person called Paula Bichella, is the owner of Hope Glen, and she hosted 70 weddings first in 2013. Her first year, well, that was her first year, 87 last year and 98 so far this year. She has been careful to maintain diplomatic relations. If a stranger bought this, there's no way they would have support, she said. But the neighbors knew us for 12 years. The DJs know what they're doing and they don't abuse the volume. It's rookies who think they have to blow the roof off. We offer free weddings and grad parties to our neighbors who are affected by us. If the neighbors don't support you, you have no business. And I would also like to mention that there's a lot of healing that needs to go along with this whole process. But I would suggest that Jeff at least send letters of apology to me and all the other people he duped for moving his barn through their land when he probably gave them false information. And I would also think that what Ryan Goodman, who said that Meadowbrook is actually meets Asheville Green Book standards, he said that at a city council meeting. It does not. To meet Asheville Green Book standards, a road needs to be 22 feet wide. Meadowbrook is only 18 feet wide, has no shoulders. It does not meet, in fact, Meadowbrook is actually a driveway and not a road. So there's just been all kinds of false information presented here. And I think what we need to do is take a step back and actually heal this process. Start getting the truth out. And in closing, I just want to say, prove all things. Hold fast to what is right and good. May the love, peace, and grace of our Lord be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Please. Any other comments? Jeff?
This is a really tough thing, you know, and it's just as tough going through it the second time as the first time. There seems to be this posse mentality of people ganging up and trying to create something out of nothing and to try to make accusations that are not true. Pardon me?
Go ahead. Sorry.
What Kurt said about moving the barn, I told him from the very beginning, we want to do worship in the barn, we want to do small weddings, and we want to do marriage retreats.
Never seen nothing over
No.
Could I please have no more comments? I will ask you to leave if there are any more comments. We gave everybody the right to speak without making any comments. Hey, no more comments unless you're up here addressing us, please. Thank you. Or I will ask you to leave.
Okay.
And that is the truth, regardless of how he wants to spin it. We had 13 events prior to making this application with no complaints. And immediately following the letter that went out in the mail, received 2 complaints. I just want to make sure as we move forward here that I'm certain that the city is going to get lots of complaints in the next year based on this. But what we have to consider is whether they're valid and whether we're operating within the statute. We've had an officer on the premise monitoring with a professional decibel meter going up and down Meadowbrook in the golf cart, which we've been maligned by our neighbors for doing that. Taking readings, making sure that we're in compliance, and we've never been out of compliance with the code. Never, ever. We haven't even been close. I can stand in my yard and in my yard be under the code. I can stand at the entrance to the parking area and we're 45 to 50 decibels. Code says you have to be under 65. until 10 PM at night. And we're under considerably by that. And this isn't really, you know, and again, people have the right to speak their opinion. The accusations that are made are exaggerated at the very best and outright untruth at the worst. And let the facts speak for themselves. There can be all the opinion in the world, but let the facts speak for themselves. I invite you guys to come out on a Friday or Saturday where we have an event and go up and down Meadowbrook with the decibel meter. We are by far way under code. With regards to the traffic on the road, I've reached out this summer to the state of Minnesota to see if we could get a redeemed sign on, a redeemed farm sign on the road, like you have the retreat center on 95 Donovan or and we were told that we were not able to get that, but what we were committed to by the state of Minnesota is that they're gonna put up large Meadowbrook Avenue signs in both directions. And I'm not in control when they do that, but Eric at the state has committed to putting up Meadowbrook Avenue signs so that people can see when Meadowbrook is coming up to make that turn. We have 2 staff members out directing people into our parking lot at all of our events that have more than 50 cars. And we were notified by one of our neighbors that there were cars that were seemingly, we had a wedding, a shower there with about 40 cars, and so we didn't have staff out directing them in. And we were notified that cars were coming beyond our driveway down Meadowbrook. And so I talked to some of the people that were missing our driveway, and we were informed that Google Maps had pinned us on the left side of the road beyond the entrance to our parking area. So I contacted Google. We reset that pin on the right side of the road, right at the parking entrance. And so I think what was happening is people were following their Google and they say, take a left on Meadowbrook, and then they say your destination is on the left. So they drove right by our entrance to our parking ramp, or parking area, to go to the left and realize that there wasn't anything there. And so that was fixed about a month ago, and I communicated that to the neighbor that contacted me on that. And we fixed that within 1 day of being notified of it. So, we also have put signs out. I had been putting signs out on out on 97 pointing, and someone took the sign and it disappeared from us for about 2 months, and then it reappeared miraculously when we were having events. Someone must have had the conscience to put it back. But we were trying to make, give people notice that the turnoff is coming up, and we've contacted the state to put those signs up for Meadowbrook Avenue. I've contacted the city and talked to the deputies about any concerns. I've notified Neil when we're supposed to notify him 3 times a year so that the sheriff can monitor events with over 100 people, and we've done that. We're asking to have it increased. We're not asking for any changes to what the code is and to what has been approved. When we first applied, it wasn't the city that put the 150 restriction on us. It wasn't a test period, it wasn't anything like that. It's what we applied for, even though the code allowed for 300. We have since found that we really would like to have 175 to 185 capacity. And when I brought it up to the city council, they suggested that I apply for a 200 quantity increase. Our barn will handle max of 185. And so we again are not trying to do anything that is outside of the code. We've operated completely within the code, and we've tried to ensure it by having an officer on duty. Both times when the complaints were issued, we had monitored, and the night that the first complaint came in, we stood in front of the person's house with a decimal meter within a few minutes of him coming up to me and telling me there was a complaint issued. We hopped in the golf cart and went down and measured it, and it was 45 decibels. The second time a complaint came in a week later, it was 52 decibels at their driveway. And so, and people say that we're turning the music down or modifying it. We're not, and that's the truth. We have a decimal meter in our barn that's right next to the DJ, and he knows the regulations, and anybody who surpasses that is not allowed to come back to our barn and to work at Redeemed again. So he has a large display right next to where he's playing the music that can be seen by me and can be seen by him, and we monitor that. And then we also have a professional handheld decibel meter, a $2,000 device that we go up and down the property lines to check to see that we're in compliance, and we are always not even close to out of compliance. You said you could hear it. I'm not standing up here and saying people can't hear it,
I'll comment later on,
you know,
so.
but, you know, that it is so incredibly subtle. What I hear, and what I could hear, that you'd almost have to be trying to hear it. And the road noise, you guys all know the road noise that happens. And it goes from 45 to 70 every time a car goes by. So, if you guys have any questions of me or for me?
I do. Is it possible? I'm just trying to figure out why there are some noise complaints, and I'm wondering if there's some kind of like maybe there's a timing issue, or maybe, well, you said you're constantly monitoring the DJ, and if perhaps there's like is there something that has to do with the level of bass or something like that occurs? I don't know. Does that bass not register on a decibel meter? I don't know. I'm just
Bass can travel
here.
through the earth, and it isn't really addressed in the sound ordinances. You can be standing at the edge of his property and not hear something that you would be able to hear 1,000 feet away if it is of the right frequency and you've got the right kind of loam and whatever. And I can also say that when there's a certain humidity, sound there carries a long ways. So when I brought up this issue, I heard it clearly. It was not bass. But I think Brandon can tell you, if anybody in the area is going to complain about annoying noise, I will do so. You've gotten more than one complaint from me, and I try to be reasonable about it. I'll tell you, I could hear it, but where I was, even though I could hear it, it was not anywhere near the point where it was a nuisance to me. And I was very clearly, I mean, I could tell when it happened, it very clearly stopped by 10 o'clock. And so, even though I could hear it, it's not anything that I would complain about. I'm also, having lived there a long time, I have heard noise from there's times I can hear people talking in their front yards, and I know who they are, and they're a half mile away. And it has to do with how, I don't know if it's the density of the air or whatever, but there's some things you can't control. And even though I could hear it, and it definitely was something that I could hear as clear as someone standing right next to me talking, I would not consider it a nuisance where I was. And it was not anything that was anywhere near the point where I would call and complain about it. So I'm not quite sure how to actually apply that to this, other than to say you may be measuring it and you may be within the boundaries, but there's things about the physics of the area that you cannot control. And I've listened to enough neighbors that I know that this happens, and it's not necessarily an unreasonable thing. I can't, I'm not going to say that it was anything I would complain about, but I really don't know how to address it. And when it's something like bass, I know that the sound ordinance really doesn't cover that. We had this problem with the gravel trucks going by. There was sounds that we could hear in our house, but when we walked outside of the house, you couldn't hear it at all. I'm not talking about bass here, but that may be what some of the other neighbors are hearing. It clearly was not that at all, but I don't know. I don't know how to describe why I even brought it up, except that you can hear it, and so I don't know what more to say about that.
Okay.
The other comment that I'd just like to make is we have always stopped at 10 o'clock. We've never gone beyond 10 o'clock. And the one time that there was a hooray, they stopped at 10 o'clock, the wedding's over, the wedding party lined up, and the bride and groom walked between the two lines and everyone cheered for them. And that probably happened at 10:05, right after the wedding stopped, so, you know, it's not something that's constant, it's just a kind of a hooray, and then people broke up and went away. I am totally unaware of the party bus going down into their driveway. We've only had one party bus that came and picked people up. The fact that all other wedding barns go to 11 or midnight, or even 1 o'clock, and we go to 10 o'clock. We don't tend to attract heavy partiers. Not saying that someone obviously ordered a party bus or a bus to drive people back to their hotel or wherever they were. But generally speaking, we're getting very mellow guests, and it's not a party, it's a wedding, and it's a celebration.
Is this a situation on the city road where you could have someone flagging people in? And,
We do.
And yes, you do. So do you have someone kind of like saying, you know, don't go further?
We do, we've got a sign out in front. I mean, we put out multiple signs. We've got these A-frame signs, and we had one about 1/8 of a mile down west of Meadowbrook, pointing that way. We have one right at the corner of Meadowbrook, pointing that way. We set one up right at our driveway, pointing into the driveway. So we're trying to direct, and we have 2 workers out there flagging people in to try to get them into. But I think this bus must have come at the end of the evening, 9:30 or 10 o'clock, to pick people up, and possibly missed it. I know for a fact they didn't turn down and go sit in their driveway full, because I watched the bus pull out.
I guess I should have taken a picture.
I can't.
Maybe there was a different instance with a different bus that was not
There's only
related.
one bus that I know of that's
Okay.
ever come to our farm.
Okay. All right. Maybe we need some kind of sign out there that says no turnaround past this point or something.
We
to
have
warn.
a no right-hand turn out of our parking area.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We have a sign that says no right-hand turn.
Is most of the traffic that the neighbors are complaining about missing the turn to begin with?
It starts before the party.
So it's
So the
likely
guys
people that
aren't
have
there
missed the
The
turn.
guys, yeah, the guys are always there for the party, it's good after that. It's before the party,
Okay.
is when we have increased
Our
traffic.
staff shows up an hour before the event starts.
Presumably your staff knows where to go though.
I'm sure they've worked at all 16 events,
Okay.
and so they flag them, they stand out and they flag them in like this. I mean, you can't miss them. They're in redeemed shirts and you can't miss them. And I think what's happened, as I stated, I think Google had a pin farther down. And so, if we had a smaller event with 20 or 40 cars, we didn't have the staff out there, or 20 or 40 cars coming, 20 or 40 people. We didn't have the staff there for that, and they may have been following Google.
Okay.
But the minute we were notified of that, within hours, literally hours, we had both applied to Google to have the PIN changed and communicated that to our neighbor. And the following day, when we were notified from Google that the PIN was changed, we again communicated that to our neighbor.
Okay.
So,
Brandon
Okay.
have something
Yeah,
else to
Brandon,
say?
did you have?
Yeah, I had the same problem with William O'Brien, with what you have at Redeem Farms, with Google sending you the wrong location. I had campers ending up on a dead-end road. So I'll work with you after, because Google will just update in the next month, and that PIN will go right back to where it was before. Because William O'Brien had the same problem. They moved their PIN, and they updated it, and it went right back to where it defaults to. So you just change your address on your website. You actually put it right where it's supposed to be, and then the address, even though it's not your actual address, it's just a different block number that you need to change, and I can work with you and tell you exactly what block number you need to put down on Meadowbrook, and it won't be an issue anymore.
Okay, thanks.
any other questions?
Anything else? Thank you.
All right, thanks.
We'll be back in a minute.
All right. Any other? Yeah.
Could I say one more thing? Sherry, and I don't know if it was the council or the planning commission, but this number 10 says that all doors and windows shall be closed.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I remember
was
that.
not
Yeah.
part of the final agreement last time.
Right. I know that.
So-
Yeah. I was going to bring that up.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
I just have, Aaron Snickel, 21097 Meadowbrook Circle. I just have a question specific to the 200 issue of increasing to 200. So there were 16 events this year so far?
Or 13? I think he said 13. 13.
There's complaint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we
So
know how
so
many-
that means 15 total.
15 total. So do we know how many events exceeded 100 people?
Jeff, can you answer that? How many events exceeded 100 people
How many had 100 people?
or more?
Or more? I think 14 of them.
Okay. My only concern, and the only thing that I would like you to all consider, is that the permit allows for 75 events per year and up to 150 people right now. So we really haven't had a period where we've seen the 75 events with 100 more people. So we really don't know, as a community, what that impact would be. And in my mind, it might be too soon to think about increasing it to 200. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I would like to just add one thing.
Is it something new?
Yeah, this is something. new.
Okay.
I would ask that Kurt Peterson, 21617 Meadowbrook Avenue North, I would ask that if this is increased from 150 to 200, that at least we do some proper screening for our neighborhood from the rural event center. I have asked Jeff, after it was approved, to put some pine trees or something along his north line, because the rural event center is just, it has a lot of lights, there's a lot of activity, a lot of people, and this is the most poorly screened rural event center I've ever seen. I've attended 3 barn weddings in my life. I've never seen one that was so open, and everything is so airy and open, and any window I look out, I can see has barn or anything else. And it's really disturbing, to be able to see that. Also, to create more of a.
It's disturbing to
noise.
see his barn.
Listen, it's disturbing to see the lights and all other stuff. There's a lot of lights. And not that they're blaring, I'm just saying that there's a lot of parking, a lot of lights from parking cars, and there's a lot of lights on his barn. And actually, there's people with flashlights going in and out of the place and stuff like that, and all kinds of stuff, and it's actually very annoying. So I'm asking for some screening for noise, for light, and for sound on his north property line. If this thing is approved, I'd like to see that kind of screening happen. So, thank
Okay,
you.
okay, thanks.
Got a response?
Oh, okay.
I'd just like to reply to that. Kurt did not ask me to put the trees on my property line until after I had called him and his wife and offered to put trees, 6 of the large trees that I put along the road. I called him after this was passed, and I said, you know, Kurt, I know the light's a concern to you. You know, I'd be willing to put 3 to 6 of these big evergreen trees anywhere you want on your property. And he told me he didn't want them on his property. That they belonged on my property, and not only, he suggested that I put them on the property line, but not only that I put them on the property line, that I put them 25 feet inside of my own property so they don't hang over onto his property. And so at that point, I just did not move forward with that offer.
Okay.
But I did try to offer that to him as a goodwill gesture last winter, that I would plant 6 of these big trees at my expense anywhere on his property to help block anything, and he refused that.
Okay, thank you.
Tim Mustank, 21460 Meadowbrook Avenue North. So I'm north on Meadowbrook, I'm the first left turn, the pin. I did reach out and contacted Jeff, I have his contact info, he's pretty easy to get a hold of actually, and he corrected that for me pretty quickly, I think within a day or 2 actually, and so that was appreciated. There were people turning down, it was a smaller event, and they didn't really know it was at an event center, they had an address, so I'm not too concerned about the traffic or increasing from 150 to 200 against maybe the popularity of the room, but because the people at the event, the number of people at the event doesn't seem to really be the problem for me, or for the inconvenience it has for our household. It's the main issue is the sound thing that, you know, like Jen and us and others were saying, just hear the sound. It's something about when the barn's open, and I agreed, I thought that was changed too, so I'd be curious to know what the actual code is for number 10. But it does seem like that's the main reason. When the barn is open, like say something like 13 out of the first 16 events, they were all, I really didn't hear, I'll be honest, I didn't hear anything. I mean, and there was music playing at them, and it was obvious. I couldn't hear anything really, but something with like the last 3 or 4 events, I don't know if it's a season thing or if it was really hot and the big barn doors were open or something. It seems to be contributing to the problem.
The 23rd, actually, the high was about 90 degrees. I mean, I'm looking at it right here,
Right.
and it was a humid day.
Right,
So-
but
So it was somewhat unusual.
yeah, so I think that the weather was probably open. I don't believe it's air conditioned. I haven't been in recently, but I've been in before, and I have had a tour and everything. I feel comfortable going to Jeff with any minor inconvenience. Obviously, any major major problem, we'll contact the sheriff, and haven't had to do so yet. I mean, there was that loud sound event, but again, it seems like the main problem that I have is related to the sound. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if you can be more restrictive than the city code, or if you can come down 10% as a trial period or something. That's kind of like along the realms of the ideas I would suggest to consider. And because again, I don't think adding a couple more people, 25, 30 people is really going to add much noise. It's really the sound is the source of my inconvenience. But to what Jan said, it's not like super unreasonable. I mean, it's annoying and it disturbs you and you hear it and it's there, but it's the unreasonable part that kind of gets me because, I don't like it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's something that I have vehement anger against. I mean, maybe my wife would beg to differ, but, so I would just like to, kind of those items. Like something about the sound is the main concern for me. And everything else has been fine, the no right turns. We got a little traffic You know, it's nothing that, I thought the traffic would be worse, coming in off 97 and whatnot. Not really impacted being in Meadowbrook, because no one really drives down there except for the few errant passengers before it and after events, well beyond. But it's hard to tell if sometimes they're for the event center or just, you know, random bikers going down the road too sometimes. So just something about the sound, and I don't know how you solve it, but that's for me, and for, I'd say most of the folks that aren't directly facing it but are in the area, I'd say that's the main thing to look at to kind of solve most of the issues, I would argue. So that's all I'd
Okay.
look at.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Yeah, one more. Number 10 about the doors, windows, and other openings shall be closed while sound amplification is occurring. So that does not apply in this case?
We're gonna
This facility, or-
we're gonna talk about that. I'm gonna bring that up in a minute. I don't believe that was.
We have to have Brenda go back and get the final resolution that went through the council.
Yeah.
They
Oh,
made-
maybe the council changed it from what we had, because I
Yeah,
don't
that's
remember
what I'm
that being on the
thinking, is
original.
that it got changed at the end, and I never got the updated final docs. So
Okay.
we need you to go back and look at what was finally approved.
Okay, so we'll take a look at that.
All right, and then Dan, you had said you were at that property
Mhm.
when there was music playing and you
Yeah.
couldn't hear it?
Not during a party. It was just on a random day during
a
the
site
day, during a site visit.
But I mean,
And
was there an event
and the
going
windows
on?
were-
no event going on. That's what I'm saying. No event going on. The windows were open.
The doors were open.
The doors were
The doors were open.
open.
Yep.
and the stereo. It was a stereo, so it wasn't like a DJ. But I
Okay, so
assume it
it
was the
wouldn't
same sound system.
But it
And
may not, and there was no decibel reading compared.
there was a
to what it
decibel
may-
reading. There was
but
it was 90 decibels.
comparable to what it would be during an event.
Well, I guess I don't know.
Okay,
I
so
do
then-
know what the decibel readings were. I don't know what they are during an event. It was 90 decibels inside the barn, which is downright on. You cannot talk inside there, more or less.
Sure.
And then on the edge of the property, it was something much less. You could barely hear it. And then when cars would go by on 97, it would spike. Actually, so meaning that the cars going by on Meadowbrook were louder than the music coming from the barn.
I'm just wondering
So-
if, when you were saying that, if that's the representative of an event and the same
Maybe it's
conditions
not.
and decibels as an event.
Is this, but that's yes. That's possibly it's
You know,
not.
there may need to be a distinction there.
Yeah. Okay. Any further points? All right. Thank you. We'll close the public part of the discussion and open it up to the commission. Anybody?
I think we have two main concerns on the part of the neighbors, traffic and the noise. And the noise thing, I don't know how to address that other than with the existing noise ordinance and what the allowable levels are. Otherwise, we'd be applying different standards to them than anyone else.
Sure.
And as far as my experience, like I said, I don't know how that compares to other people, but I know that I just looked this up, and on the 23rd, it was an unusually hot day, and the humidity was 88% at
Maybe
about
that
8 o'clock
had
at
something to
night,
do with it.
and almost the same thing on that following Saturday. So I don't know if that contributed to it, but somehow we need to decide whether that's something that they can do anything about.
Sure.
I'd like to know if the first 13 events were no problem, and I don't know that for sure, but someone stated that, and then the later events were. I'd
Well,
like to know- I'd like to know
tell
what
you
changed.
that I go down, I take that walk every night, any day of the year. And those are the only two times I've ever heard it.
The last two.
The 23rd
Last
and
two
the 30th.
events. Okay. That's interesting. Okay.
And I'm not saying that's representative of the neighbors.
Yeah. Right. Because you're a little bit further away than
Right,
other
right,
folks.
'cause, I'm almost 3/4 of a mile away.
Mhm.
We'll check on that number 10. Are we able to do that tonight or no? If it's not,
Well, she can't take
Sure.
minutes while she's
Oh.
checking.
Yeah.
Neil, can you do that? Thank you.
Yeah.
Or Neil, can you take minutes? One of the two.
You're very talented.
Neil
but
does
no
it.
pressure.
Bring it with you. Bring the notes with you. Here, I guess are my thoughts on this whole issue. It sounds like, pun not intended, that sound is really the issue. And that's, if we would have heard more concerns, it would have been about the sound, I think, throughout the year. But we didn't. And I think that we all learned valuable lessons here tonight about calling sheriffs for things because they're our police. And so I think that we all learned that. I don't know unless we change the ordinance or if we change the specifications for this
For an event
specific
center.
event center or event centers in general.
It would have to be in general. You couldn't
Right.
specifically call out.
In
Right.
general,
Yeah.
right? That we could do anything different in terms of sound. And I do agree with the last person that spoke that having an increased number of people, I don't hear the concerns from folks that came up tonight say that it was the voices necessarily. Maybe in one case at the end of the night at 10:05 with the hoorah, but otherwise it was the music that was the loud part, right? So
That's
increasing
what I
the
heard.
number of people isn't necessarily going to increase the sound that they can hear. It's the thumping and it's the noise.
Well, we have multiple issues that we've talked about, but what's actually in front of us is the increase in number.
Right.
Right.
And I don't know if the increase in number of people from 150 to 200 is going to change that thumping or noise,
issue.
regardless of it being above or below the permissible level. Now, I think that as a suggestion was made, we could lower by a percentage for this property or for all event centers. I think one person came forward and said we lower it by 10%. I can't remember who exactly it was, but I think it was
Last gentleman.
the last gentleman,
Yeah.
10%. If we lowered it by 10% or even 20% in this case, if we lowered it by 20%, I think that it was told by Mr. Gasek that there was only one time that his decibel level went over 50, and it was 53, I think is what he had said. So we could lower it to 50, and I still don't think that it would exceed, really, except for maybe the one time when you turned down the music. Otherwise, it was in the 40s or 30s is what the reports were saying. So
Right. Well, so the current ordinance says 65.
right.
So if you lower it to 50, you're not really doing anything. Because
Right,
I mean,
I'll have to be clear with you, you cannot change the ordinance. The city uses the state standard for noise. And in Minnesota, state law prohibits localities from having a different standard,
Whether it's
There you
higher
go.
or lower.
higher or lower. And,
Yeah.
and the reason for that is particularly for businesses, you can't have them having to meet 100 different standards
Sure.
in communities across the state.
Yeah.
Would there be any way you could change it for a specific
And I
group
think
of?
that would be a question for the attorney, whether for this, and I think you could, but I'd want to get his opinion on that, whether for this particular use,
Yep.
you could set a standard like 50 decibels, or use the nighttime standard rather than the daytime standard, or whatever. I think we'd have to ask him if that would be perceived as discriminating against a particular use.
sure.
I mean, the way this has been dealt with some other event centers is just simply to say no amplified noise. I mean, there's a wedding event center in Stillwater Township where there is no amplified noise allowed.
How do they provide music? Or
They don't.
They don't provide
do the
music.
parties at all. They do the ceremonies. They maybe do a little.
And the
cake
ceremonies are
whatever.
not amplified either? Or
They can have amplified voices during the ceremony. The minister's voice can be amplified so people can hear it. But if you're gonna allow parties at all, it's really hard not to allow some kind of amplified music. But that is how at least one other community has dealt with it, is to not allow the party part of things at the event, to simply say they can do the wedding ceremony, they can do a little catered food or something after the ceremony, but they cannot, people have to leave if they're gonna go to the party. But
don't think that's where
I
I'm
haven't experienced someone trying to say for one use in the code, we're gonna try to have a lower standard than the city's noise standard. And I guess my thought would be I'd need Andy's opinion on whether we can
Right,
say.
because if that's, the threshold would apply to even a resident or, any business within the community.
Right, it'd be making a bit of a discrimination against this use.
I'm not sure that people are not hearing sound that are much lower than our code. I mean, if there's a bass or something like that,
Yeah.
and you can hear it, it could very well meet all the codes, and even a code that's more stringent.
That's right.
Exactly.
Because it's a vibration
And
thing.
we
with
wouldn't-
bass. And I
Right, you
know
generally
that
feel it more than you hear it.
from
and-
my own experience, I know that that's true, that you can hear bass much farther than you can hear the
Right.
rest of the music. And it's really a sort of impact, you know,
Right.
sort of
Concussion.
vibration thing. is
And I've been
not
told,
so
like, when we can hear it inside our house, but not outside, that it has to do with actually the dimensions of the room, that it sets up a harmonic, and then that actually is louder.
And the weather changes it, clouds change it a lot. When we lived in downtown St. Paul, there were times that we could hear events from the fairgrounds, and it was because it was cloudy and the
And so
noise
the
was
noise was
bouncing
going-
off the clouds.
Yeah.
I mean, we could hear things that far.
Sure.
So all kinds of things affect noise. It's sort of gets to be a difficult thing to do anything other than use the standards in the noise ordinance.
Yeah, we
Because of
start
that.
having to have some kind of scientist
Because
come out
anybody
and
could
figure
be
out.
having a party at their house, you know,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
Or setting off fireworks for that matter.
right,
Yeah.
that's the.
Well, and even
It's
if-
more the question, I think, of, is there a general way that you would wanna restrict things here? We'd have to ask Andy if you could have anything different than the noise standards, or if there's some way technically to say the base level must be below a certain threshold, not just the decibel, but a base level, if that's part of the problem.
It sounds
I-
pretty scientific to me.
It gets to
Yeah.
be, you know, we almost
Pretty
need to call in
specific.
a sound expert to ask about that question. But as far as could we have a different standard, I don't know. The one attempt I know of that's been made is to say no amplified music, or only amplified music during the ceremony and no parties.
Yeah.
Well, if it's true that the first 13 events were not a problem, I'd still like to know
What
what
happened?
changed to make the other ones a problem.
Well, are
And until
you,
we know that, how can we?
I think we can make some pretty fair assumptions, though. I mean, we can say that
Late summer
it's
heat.
been pretty mild all summer until that last that week. I mean, I don't know that for
The-
certain, but
the
it's been a
atmos-
pretty mild summer.
yeah, the atmosphere's conditions really did change. And I'm wondering if there really was a change in the sound, or did our neighbors decide that they needed to complain to get it on the record and didn't realize before that they needed to do that?
Sure.
Or,
Sure,
or
that's a
did,
good
were the
point,
barn, or were the doors and windows open?
Yeah.
Totally resent that.
Jeff, can I ask you, were the windows and doors open for the previous events, or was it just for those events in September?
No, it's been consistently the same.
Always open? Okay. Okay.
Always the same. I know I'm not supposed to talk, but I'm just questioning, is it different, maybe different bands or DJs? So maybe some have different sound systems, or is it always the same?
It's always the same sound system because there's only one sound system in the barn, and they use the same sound system. The DJs, I imagine, shift based on whatever the people hire. I would like to bring up the thought of screening. I have a couple of thoughts about screening. I don't really think it's necessary on this site because of the location and how far it is from the property lines. However, screening might help break up some of the sound at screening at distance, like sound doesn't travel as well if you've got trees in the way and that kind of thing.
Well, is that something we can bring up if that isn't really the topic of this?
Well, we can, because this is opening up the IUP and
Right.
giving us the
Okay.
opportunity to say that we could ask for an additional condition.
Okay.
The only thing I'd say is MnDOT, has done a lot of work on screening and vegetation, and honestly, it needs to be pretty thick before it will.
Really? Okay.
And I'd hate to throw away what we think might work when it's
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
something else.
yeah, right. Yeah, well, that's a good point. There's no.
These invest several $1,000s into vegetation that may or may not make a difference.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good point.
If it's not gonna do anything about a baseline or whatever, you know, it may not. I can see that from a neighbor perspective, the lights might be an issue if it.
Yeah, well, and that's where I was kind of going with
I
that. It
wouldn't necessarily
kind of killed
want
two
it.
birds.
I thought
So
there was
maybe
something
that's-
about lighting in the original discussion.
Wasn't there a lumen value from?
Yeah, they have to
And I
meet the
don't
lighting
see it in
standards
here,
at the edge
but-
of the property,
Right, at the edge of
which, yeah.
And I just say, this was already addressed at the last year, and we were required to put in screening, and we put in the screening that the planners and the commissioners asked for.
Yeah.
$20,000 worth of screening, so we put in exactly what you had already asked for.
Yeah, okay.
So I think it'd be terribly unfair to use this as an opportunity to start spreading that out and having us do more. We're operating within the code, and we've never exceeded the code. And what we're asking for, the code says we can have up to 300 people. What we're asking for is to go from the 150 to 200.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with you. I don't think that changing from 150 to 200 is going to have any effect on the sound, or not much, anyways. I think it'd be minor. It's not going to have any effect on the lights.
On the sound that's being complained on.
Right.
Right,
Right.
right.
That seems like that's
It
a
might be better to have more people, because people absorb sound.
sure.
Fill up the room.
Sure.
Soak
Yeah.
up the sound.
Yeah.
Soak up the sound.
Well,
Well, I
we have
heard
to
that the-
require only tall people or very dense people.
Yes, taller, dense people to soak
I
up
heard
sound.
that the event center can only handle 185.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're saying.
Why don't we increase it to 185 instead of 200?
Because he's requesting for 200.
Okay.
It could be.
Good answer.
It could be.
Good answer.
It could be. And it could be modified to fit 200. I can do it. All right. Well.
Where are we at?
Yeah. Where are we at? That's a good question.
Well, just
What? Yeah.
on my
give a response to
expedition,
that.
Yeah.
that second sentence in here, all doors through occurring, that is not in the resolution that was approved by the city council.
That's how I
So
recall.
how did
Yeah.
that get in this?
It was in there originally. I think the council took it out in the final approval.
We took it out in
I
planning
never got a
commission.
Yeah, I
copy
think
of
we-
the-
Yeah. We took it out in the planning
revised
commission.
resolution, so Brenda has it.
Yeah.
We can take that out. that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
In the one that was approved by the city, I don't remember sending it to the city with the doors and windows being closed. We talked about the heat and everything.
It doesn't matter. At this
Yeah.
point, it's not in
Right.
there.
Yeah. To confirm with everybody that might be concerned about that.
Well, I don't think we have enough experience to say, to do anything different at this point.
To increase it to 200?
Well, you think it's 200, I don't see that that's a problem. I don't think we have enough experience with where the sound problems are coming from, or what's causing them. I don't think we know.
You don't think we know enough to actually address
Make
it
the
in
change,
an
right.
act proactive manner?
Yeah.
I think we know where the sound is coming from, right? It's the music. That's what the complaints are,
Yes.
not the people. But we don't know how to fix the music sound, right?
Correct.
Right.
And we don't know what conditions where people can hear it sometimes and not other times.
Mhm.
When it could be at the same decibel level
Right.
at the property edges.
Right.
And I don't think you can say that you can't have weddings on cloudy days,
No.
right?
No.
Because the sound bounces more on cloudy days. So if it's cloudy, then you can't have a wedding.
Yeah.
You can't
One-
say that.
One way
Wow.
to look at it, if that's your sense of things, is that there's not enough information. Mr. Gasek now knows that there were 13 events where sound was not a problem for people. And there were a few events at the end of the year where it was a problem.
Or at least there were 13 events where no one complained.
complained. And where at least one of the people here said it wasn't a problem in those, but it was something different was the one with the last one.
Mhm.
He also knows now that people will be motivated to call and complain if noise is a problem, and that the deputy will respond. And if it continues to be, if it is a big issue during this year and it's substantiated that he's not complying, it will be an issue when Neil and/or the council review this next year.
That's where I'm thinking is right now we are looking at this increase to 200. There's no reason to not increase it to 200 based on the sound problems. The sound problems can be addressed at the next AOP meeting, which is in a year from now in September. And
When we may or may not know more of what's happening.
That's
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
where we have an owner now who knows the complaints and maybe can think about whether there's some way to address it.
I mean, it's not as if we are not saying that we're not going to keep monitoring and we're not going to say you still have to comply. That's not what we're saying. We're just increasing the number of people he can have. I mean, that's what this change is. He's still going to have to maintain that he's staying underneath the ordinances for the sound. That's not changing. And if there are complaints, we have to take care of them.
Valid.
Still.
And
That's going to be the same whether or not there's 200 or 150. He's already got the AOP for 150. He can keep operating that way, and he can get complained against that way, or he can get complained against with 200. I don't know that it makes much difference,
Right,
really.
and it does sound from his descriptions that he's taken a number of steps to try to address the traffic issue.
Right.
I mean,
More than-
I've talked
That's
with
which
Google
is the
about
other
things. I
issue.
think that's a common problem for Google to have a pin in the wrong spot. And it sounds, I've done the same thing he has. You contact them and they change it. And I don't know, you may need to speak with the deputy and see if you can figure out what make sure you know what his suggestion is on if it gets updated and the pin goes back to the same incorrect spot again.
Yours is correct.
He's
So-
looking it up.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm ready to make a recommendation.
Can I interject? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. For everybody in attendance, I'm Chris Ness, City Council Liaison to the Planning Commission. Question for Jeff, your two driveways off of Highway 97, are they blocked off during events?
One.
There's only one driveway,
Yes.
Okay.
We have an arrow so that they aren't, we were told we cannot have them turning into our driveway.
That's not the same as being blocked off, because when we hear about issues about people pulling in and then backing out onto 97, I don't like that at all.
Yeah, that sounds dangerous.
So you're saying more of like because I've seen it. I've driven by when there are
Blocked off,
A
not
signs. So you're talking about something more solid across there, so that yeah.
Something like that would be one of
Okay,
my,
barricade. Yeah.
issues. And then screening, Neil, do you have, what was the screening on the last one? Do you have that with you right now?
I do not. There was a
Okay.
plan that was approved and that plan has been implemented.
Okay, I guess that there had already been discussions between Mr. Peterson and the Gasics about putting trees on the back lot. And I guess I'd like to see some, Jeff had offered to do it, but on Mr. Peterson's property, well, I think he should do it on his own property. And I can't see where more screening would hurt.
So,
more trees for
can I
lighting,
ask you a
that type of
question?
thing. Yeah.
So if there's other property, where does that stop on Meadowbrook? So it's on the north property line. So let's say we put in 6 on the north. As far as I'm aware, there's some residents that have property on the west side of Meadowbrook that they could subdivide at some point and put other houses there. As far as I understood from a year ago and now, right, that's still the case. You could subdivide that land over there. Do we put all the way along Meadowbrook?
Yes.
And then all the way along the north side, and then all the way along the other side because there's a house. Like, where does that stop? You know what I mean?
I understand, but,
It doesn't sound-
it has been an issue, and, noise and light and that type of thing. They've had discussions about putting 6 trees. I mean, that's a good place to start, and I guess,
I think six
He's
trees
already
are,
offered to do it.
six
I don't
trees
know
are
that
not gonna
6
do
trees will-
anything.
Well,
I have a
for lighting,
house-
that type of thing.
I have a
Depends on where
house
they're placed
between where I
and what the,
hang out and my neighbors, and I can hear my neighbors around my house and the tree line that I have in front of my house.
Can I say something? I
Sure.
I don't know
put 20
if it'll open
trees
up.
along the front property line and a 12-foot tall berm to try to block the road noise. And it does very little. And you guys are free to come and stand in my yard and listen on the other side of that berm that I built.
So you're saying it's not effective to reduce sound?
And because I thought it would.
Okay, hey, yeah, please don't address the commission, please.
And so my offer was not because I thought it would block the noise or block the, I thought if they wanted, they had complained at a year ago that the light was shining right in their bedroom window. And I offered to put some trees up by their house if they wanted to block it. Because if you look at, from a window out, the closer you get to the window, the more it's gonna block it.
Sure, perspective,
And-
yeah.
And the city has already passed and required us to spend $20,000 on screening for the parking area and for putting trees in already, and we've done that, we've complied already. And the house that we're talking about is over 1/3 of a mile away. So screening it'd be one thing if it were 500 feet or even, something less than that, but it's 1,800 feet away, 1/3 of a mile away.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna allow you to have one comment, just briefly. Do you have any? Okay. All right, I don't know. Well, I would like to talk a little bit more about the
Okay.
screening issue. Yeah, as we know, we don't know if it would be effective. It may or may not be. It might be effective for the lighting. Wouldn't you? It wouldn't. Yeah.
MnDOT's research for highway noise, level noise, you have to have at least 300 feet of solid conifers to get any noise reduction from typical highway noise.
Oh, and you said thick. I thought you meant like a double row.
yeah.
They put a
So-
solid,
They put a
massive wall,
Yeah.
like freeways.
I mean,
That's how it stops it.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's why they do walls,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there isn't space to do vegetation that's gonna screen highway level noise, and so blocking light might be reasonable, and maybe there's a way to look at the plan and say, in terms of where his activity area is on the site, are there some strategic trees that could be placed to block noise or block light from neighbors? I don't have the plan with me, and we'd have to look back at what was required for screening. I thought most of his activity area was included in the screening.
Oh, I think that what I remember from last time is that the lighting was well within the restrictions that we have from the
Yeah.
city.
I don't think lighting is the issue here.
And it was-
I'm not.
So really
I'm not
for
concerned
noise,
about
If we're
lighting.
talking noise, it just
It's not
isn't-
worth. Okay.
It isn't gonna help.
Okay.
It's more of a mental thing that you have a screen, and so you don't notice it as much, but in terms of real noise reduction, it's
It's
not.
not gonna do anything. Okay.
I do
Well.
have a question.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
The DNR will plant a couple rows of trees, pretty reasonable
Oh,
for him. That wouldn't help a lot.
on his property. Okay.
The
Well,
DNR allows people to order trees to
Oh.
plant on their own
And they grow
properties,
really
they're
fast.
rather small,
okay.
Yeah, they come in about,
Are you talking
like that.
Yeah.
about the root shoots that they give away?
They're up to
they're
your
like
knees, the white
seedlings.
pines are up to your knees and they grow really fast.
So I think the question for you guys is, does the addition of the 50 more people make a difference? In the rules of conditional use permits and interim use permits, if he meets the city's criteria, we need to grant it.
Yeah.
You would have to say what criteria he's not gonna meet by adding those people in order to deny
Yeah.
this request.
Yeah.
You could decide to add a condition or two, and maybe the one about blocking the driveways because of the issue on 97 is
Yeah.
a reasonable one.
Mhm.
I'm not sure what other conditions we could add at this point about noise. It's almost more that this operator needs to do some thinking about what has changed on the site and think about how he's gonna deal with that issue before his next AOP,
Yeah.
in my thought.
Is there I guess my question is, how would we word in a condition to require blocking of that driveway? He already has signs up there, but I understand the point that there is maybe a little space where you can kind of get in there with a car. I don't know, where we just say that it's blocked so that there's absolutely no access. But even if you do that, he'd have to be all the way out on the right of way in order to block a car from getting into that driveway at all.
And it's still public right of way up until his property line, which is
Right.
probably 75 feet off the center line.
Yeah, which is like past where the driveway crossed the ditch.
And where the sign actually is.
And
Right. And I could see someone coming from the west and just doing a big U-turn there.
Sure.
And the
yeah.
blockade would do nothing for
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
And the signage that MnDOT says that they will install, the larger signs, may help mitigate that a little bit
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't think we're getting any further.
yeah. Well, okay. Well, what about adding? Are you interested in adding a condition to block off that driveway? I think I think that's not a bad idea.
Can you put something in a public right away?
And
Okay, or
talking
do you
about
have to
at
put
the
it?
Oh,
on
we
your-
can't require him to put anything in the public.
I don't think we can.
No.
I think you can require him to
Okay.
put him on his property, which is 75 feet
Right,
off the
he'd
center
have to
line,
do
which
it
would
in
be
his parcel
enough
boundary.
room.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think
Alright.
you can. I think that then people that would come out and say that I can't see around the car. That's what happens when you put a bush or a tree or a car or
Not allowed to do that.
something in the right of way. Is
Yeah,
people
you
say you
can't
can't
do
see
that.
around
Right.
it.
Okay.
They
All right.
pull up
Well,
to the intersection, they can't see because the car's out in the end of the driveway. I can't see turning out onto off of Meadowbrook on 97 because the car's there.
Yeah. Okay.
I make
So-
a motion to recommend approval of the amendment to the interim use permit for a rural event facility on a parcel located at 12680 Scandia Trail North with the conditions outlined by the planning staff.
With the one change on condition number 10, taking out the doors and windows being shut.
Just bring it back
Yes.
to original.
Yeah.
Number 10
Back to the
corrected
original, yeah.
to the original.
I'd
Yeah.
just like to make.
So I'm sorry. The public discussion is closed.
Well,
Sorry.
You let.
I realize that. I allowed that.
I mean,
Yes, we've had a lot of discussion.
I'm just curious how that ended up not being applicable to him, yet it will be applicable to any others.
It's not. It's not applicable. It wasn't in the original, and it's not going to be in this one. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay.
Or
Any
you can
further
second.
discussion? Jan seconded.
Yeah, the the one thing that I think we might be able to do to appease a lot of the concern that was tonight, which was the noise of the sound of the music, right? Is there some addition? I mean, we have the dosimeter, we have the regulation for sound. We can't change the regulation for sound per the state. Is there something that we can do to monitor or to have a study that's done to see if maybe, because maybe the dosimeter doesn't pick up the bass, that the bass exceeds something? Like, can we approve this, but look into, because I don't think that the people is the issue here for the sound.
We could ask,
Can we do more research in
the city
sound?
has a noise person who helped with the mining projects. It's possible to ask Steve about that issue related to the baseline. I mean, he's been doing this for 35 years.
I want to
starting
talk
with
to
the
a
PCA.
sound expert.
And
Yep.
he's been our sound expert,
Yep.
and we could ask him if he knows of, how to substantiate whether there's a difference between bass and other sound, and if there are some typical recommendations for.
Have him look into it and see what he thinks might be the
And if there's
problem.
anything we could do to
To
mitigate
for
this
the
problem.
baseline.
And if there's an additional code about that, we say a decibel level, but are we missing something about a base code?
Yeah, and we can, if it's all right with Neil, we could certainly ask Steve,
Yeah.
explain the situation to him and ask if there are standards for bass that are different from noise standards and something we could recommend.
Does the mayor have
Okay,
a question?
thank you.
If I could just make a comment real quick. I've just been doing a quick Google search back here while you're sitting there, and it's about the effects of what atmospheric conditions can do to the traveling sound. And it's wind, it's temperature, it's humidity. And so I think if Jeff can be aware of that, and when there's certain atmospheric conditions that are going on or occurring, and when he has something, an event scheduled, that maybe they might be able to talk about possibly adjusting things to what they usually do. I mean, I don't think.
Just lowering the
that
volume a
Any of
little.
us have, I used to be able from our farm to hear the train down on.
I can hear the train.
on
Yeah.
Well
Yep.
go by on some nights.
Wait.
I mean, there's sometimes you simply can't, and sound dust does travel. So I did a quick Google search and thought I'd just share that. It doesn't have anything to do with 200 people.
All right, we have a
Motion on the
Motion.
table, and then a request to look into more sound information.
yeah. All right, any further discussion?
I think the only other thing we might consider is saying no amplified sound, but I hesitate to do that for a business like this.
I think that removes the business.
I think it does too.
Yeah.
Well,
In
we
order
got
to do
13
that,
events, there
I
wasn't a
think we have
problem, I
to
don't know
do
why.
Much more sort of looking at the issue and substantiate that he's somehow violating the criteria in the
Yeah.
ordinance by what he's doing.
Yeah. Okay. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That will go to the city council in 2 weeks, and they will make the final decision. And thank you.
That was easy.
All right, where are we? Where's my agenda? I lost my agenda.
Keeping up with it.
Where's my agenda?
I don't know, did I
Which,
take it?
I don't know.
think we should
What- Can I see your agenda?
Here.
Thank you.
Night.
It's because of business.
Sorry.
I don't think we can. No, I don't think.
You can
not-
send a letter to Neil, and Neil can get distributed to everybody via email. But
At
we have
this
to
point, I
move-
think
keep moving
the
on.
discussion is closed at this point. Sorry. All right, that takes us to the discussions. And by my calculations, it's 9:30. And I am interested in hearing any comments about.
I don't think any of these are critical to
Okay.
deal with tonight.
We could do
Okay.
B and C, can't we?
I move that we table them till next
P&C,
meeting. Do we
development
have a lot
code.
on the agenda for next month?
Not that we know of. We might have one variance application, but I have not heard anything else. And they haven't submitted their final stuff, so we don't know when they're coming back.
Aren't B and C no-brainers? We just
Well,
did
it's the solar ordinance. We have to go over the final
Oh,
draft of the solar
okay.
ordinance and the,
B's closer to a no-brainer, but
that.
still.
B, maybe.
yeah. Okay. So we don't need, do we need a motion? Do we need a motion to table these?
I don't think you do.
Okay, so let's table the discussions on number 7 until next month. And any items for future agendas? I gotta find I have the note.
I would, can we have a meeting where we talk about just the shoreline management ordinance? Because we keep
That might
putting it
end up being
off,
next
and it's gonna take some grinding to get that thing done.
It's winter.
And,
It's a sort of question for you of whether you want to do a special meeting at some point. Because if applications come in, because of the timelines that there are, we have to deal with them. We can't.
Can't just say, no, not this month,
Yeah.
wait till next month?
Oh.
Sorry, we're busy?
That's right. So that's the part we can't control, is when the applications come in. But you could certainly, depending on how city staff feel about it, you could set a special meeting to deal with shoreland. You could come early and have, an hour to deal with shoreland before we do other stuff. Those would be a couple options.
if we didn't have any site visits like in December, we could.
Yeah, well, we don't do site visits in December. We do them on Sundays if we have them.
And that may
So-
be,
Because of
I don't know
daylight.
when it gets dark for November because
Yeah.
you're already gonna have a time change.
Yeah,
Right.
so
So
November and
potentially
December.
an hour before the November meeting, just have a planning work session,
Yeah,
because your site visits may be on a different date.
Okay, well, that would work, would that work for
And
you?
November is put off for a week because of the
Right.
election schedule.
Right, so it's like the 14th or something,
Okay.
yeah.
Ooh, so in which case I might be unavailable. That's fine.
yeah, so it'll be after daylight saving time, so it'll definitely be dark. So
Okay.
if you wanted to do it as a workshop for an hour to really try to grind it out, and then if we don't have any applications, we'll just keep going.
Okay,
If you do, you can do the one or whatever we get and then
Come back to it.
okay. Would you be available for that?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
That would be the second Tuesday.
yeah, it's easier
It's
to,
also Fire Day. That's fine.
it's easier to come early than to try to find another date that's gonna work for
Yeah.
everybody.
And that
Okay.
that would be a 6 o'clock start.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
would that work for
You
you?
guys can
Maybe,
handle. You can
possibly.
handle it without me.
And Neil
Okay.
will remind us in November that it's early, right?
Yes.
So we
I
would
will
all need
update
to be
the
there, all
agenda.
three of us would
That
need to
it-
be
it's
there.
Submit your
early on a late
comments
date.
in writing.
You three have to be here though. You can't be sick.
Yeah, nobody can be sick, because
Otherwise you
otherwise we
don't have a
wouldn't have a
quorum.
quorum if
Alright.
Travis didn't come,
Oh,
because Walt
okay.
is not gonna be available.
Okay.
So, okay.
What about
And you have to be there so I don't have to lead the meeting.
do we need to? What happens with our vacancy? Do we need,
Hang on just a
You guys don't
second.
do anything.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
So I would also like to add on for future agendas, considering possibly looking at our wetland setbacks. I know we've got a lot of stuff to look at, but,
But
It's
they have,
actually part of the shoreland ordinance.
oh, it's in there.
Okay.
I was wondering
It's
actually if
there,
that was in
so
there.
if you wanted to, we could add that to shoreland or
Mm-hmm.
not.
Good call on that.
and could we possibly have a little history reminding us of how many variance requests have come in
Recently
recently on
issue.
that? To-
Yeah, that's easy to do.
Yeah, okay.
And it would be very easy to look at what your watershed districts require in terms of wetland buffer distances.
Yeah, like Bowser or whatever they require.
What people recommend
Mm-hmm.
or what your watershed districts require as kind of a starting point for
Yeah.
discussion.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, next meeting is November 14th at 6 o'clock. And the 6 o'clock start will be a public meeting?
Yes.
Is that
Every
correct?
meeting's
Okay.
public
Every
meeting.
well, right.
We have,
Right, of
if we
course.
have a quorum, it has to be a public
Right,
meeting.
right, and it's, yeah, but it'll be called a work session though, right, as opposed to a public
Just
hearing
like
or
the city
something?
council work sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
And I'll probably still list it as a agenda item so that we
Sure.
can just go through it, but if we are going to take action to schedule it for a public hearing, it'll be, in that 7 range as an
Yeah.
agenda item.
okay, okay. All right. Make a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I abstain.
You made the motion.
That's
You
a good thing we
can't
had a-
abstain.
I'd be a troublemaker today. Oh, you wanna go, don't you? What's the matter, you hungry? I ran out of treats, didn't I?
Thank you.
Should I hit pause? That's because I can't talk freely anyways.